Agenda Forum open. Welcome one and all. Agenda forums are specifically for agenda items which are to be considered by the next ordinary meeting of Council. Agenda forums are not a decision-making forum. They provide an opportunity for councillors to be equally informed and seek additional information on matters prior to the presentation of such matters to the next ordinary meeting of Council for formal consideration and decision. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed. The recording will also be archived and made available on the Council's website after the meeting. If you choose to participate in a meeting during public question time and deputation time, it is assumed that your consent is given for the audio to be recorded. Please keep your comments respectful to the Council and other members of the public. Visual images of the public will not be captured. And on the matter of live streaming, Council, we are experiencing some internet issues at the moment, so we're not sure the continuance or the quality of the service tonight. In regards to face masks, if someone is not in the place they ordinarily reside, they are required to be wearing a face mask. We have been using masks for a week now and have experienced that there are very few circumstances a person is not able to be heard or understood. Therefore, masks should remain on at all times. The only exception to this rule is if a person is speaking and cannot be heard, and I will then ask them to remove their mask for the duration of their speech and place it back on when they have concluded. The City's election caretaker provisions policy requires candidates of relevant elections to identify themselves as an election candidate prior to asking a question or making a statement at Council meeting. Councillor Henderson has declared he is the Liberal candidate for the district of Swan Hills. This statement is taken to apply to the entirety of the meeting, and Councillor Henderson is not required to identify his candidacy each time he addresses the meeting. Attendance and apologies. We have Councillor Lucas, the Deputy Mayor, on leave. Councillor Jones is running late, and Councillor McCulloch is an apology with car issues. Are there any other apologies, Mr CEO?
No other apologies, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Declarations of financial and proxy interest and interest affecting impartiality. I have nil. Are there any, Mr CEO?
Yeah, Mr Mayor, I have one declaration of interest from Councillor Johnson in relation to item 4.6, replacement fence at St Jude's, and that's a proximity interest.
Mayor, if you may, I've also got one on that item, impartiality, given I'm on the Guildford Association, who may have made comment on that application.
Okay. Any further declarations? Okay. Thank you, Councillor. No others? Yes, Councillor Scanlon.
Sorry, Mr Mayor. With a 7.2 local government ordinary elections, do I need to declare if I'm a candidate for the election, for the 2021 October election?
Election hasn't been called yet, Councillor. So
sorry, I don't have to declare. Thank you.
Okay. No other declarations? Thank you, councillors. Public question time. Questions relating to reports contained in the agenda. Questions for which notice has been given, I have nil. And I have no registrations from the public in regards to questions without notice. Reports and motions of which previous notice has been given. Presentations and deputations. 6.1 deputations. In accordance with the procedure of public participation agenda forums, all written deputations received by 4 p.m. Tuesday 9th of February have been circulated. Each deputation will be a maximum of 5 minutes to address council. Time for councillors to address the deputies will be conducted after all the deputations of each item are heard, and all questions are required to be directed through the presiding member. Part A is nil. Part B is on the first item is 4.1, which is further consideration for the proposed amendment number 178 to local planning scheme number 17 to rezone lot 811 number 6 Tipper Court, Hazelmere from general industrial to special use to facilitate commercial hub. There are 2 deputations. The first one is from Mr Jason Hunt from Statewide Planning, speaking against the recommendation. Thank you, Mr Hunt. And you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Councillors, for the opportunity to make the presentation. I apologise for these pauses. My glasses are fogging. We're here representing the landowners who own land in 3A precinct. Thank you very much.
and in this role have recently lodged a structure plan for the land contained within the Special Use 16 zone, which is on the western fringe. This occurred in December 2020. As part of this process, we engaged with various service providers, the City and the Planning Commission. We've now reviewed the officer's report, having looked at this when it was previously considered a year ago by the Council, and raised the following matters. We agree that there is a need for the proposed land uses in the area. However, there is also a need for general industry land. The Hazelmere area is growing as a transport logistics centre, and currently zoned land should be retained in our view. The site currently does not have a sewer connection, and while the HESAP and also the conditions proposed advocate dry industry land uses in those circumstances, the report does note that a number of the land uses that are proposed would not be considered dry industry, like a fast food. As these uses on the site and the proposal that was considered a year ago have considerably changed, we wonder if it is still viable for sewer to be brought to this site. The Bushmead and Lloyd Street roads are part of the RAV network, and the City and other agencies have recently spent considerable sums on Lloyd Street. The functionality, the planning, the modelling and all of this has been done on the basis that this site is a general industry site, not the now higher traffic that is being proposed. The report notes that there are some potential sensitive land uses, consulting rooms, and as per the EPA guidelines, the development of the site with these sensitive land uses will actually impact and prejudice the development of labouring sites, which are general industry, because they don't have the required buffer and setbacks. The retail needs analysis showed that the proposed land uses are needed, but in our view are better suited to the fringe of the HESAP over in the Special Use 16 zone, which is still connected to the RAV network and where this type of centre can act as a transitional land use between the general industry land and the residential land use, as referred to in the officer's report option 2. As many of you on Council will recall, development of the endorsed HESAP structure plan was a long process and involved considerable consultation and community engagement. The land in Precinct 3A on the western fringe has been identified as a suitable location for the requested land uses in this scheme amendment. It also has sewer and the required infrastructure in close proximity. Being in this location, it will also integrate both and provide services to the industrial land and the residential land. The Tipper Court site, after hours, will be the only light show on in town. The western fringe is more suitable and an appropriate location for a retail centre, allowing it to act as that transitional land use as was intended in the HESAP. What is proposed in the scheme amendment not only reduces the viability of such a site, it provides uncertainty for landowners. The HESAP, in its summary, outlined that without a structure plan, which is what the HESAP is, development uncertainty will remain. Infrastructure provision will be haphazard, land conflict will continue, and environmental and traffic issues are likely to be exacerbated. The approved structure plan provides this certainty, and you are now being asked to deviate from this adopted position. We want to know, will this occur for the other corner lots in this area? With regards to the Western Fringe site, one of the most significant matters that we had to work through in preparing the structure plan was the recently changed ANEF contours. This is a matter that the Council itself considered at the last meeting. The impact of this change on this particular site is that what was previously proposed as residential land in the HESAP is now no longer suitable for that use, as it's mapped as being in the over 25 ANEF contour. This means that as a result, residential land will not be supported and that there will be more service and industry land uses in this area. We would wonder what significant change has occurred to the general industry land in Tipper Court that requires this rezoning. Is it merely commercial opportunity? In summary, we agree that there is a need for these land uses, but that they should be appropriately located, and if the City decides to initiate spot zoning, it will threaten the viability of other areas within the HESAP. It's not proper and orderly planning, and therefore the Council should, in our view, select option 2 for the reasons outlined by the officer and not initiate this amendment process. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
I'm
Mr.
not
Hunt.
sure
Your
on time. I'm
Timing is absolutely perfect, and I'll just ask you to take a seat because we may have questions.
All right. Thank you.
Next speaker is Mr. Mike Davis from Element, the applicant supporting the recommendation. Mr. Davis, thank you.
Good evening, Mr Mayor, councillors and staff. Thank you for the opportunity to make a deputation in relation to this item tonight. I am speaking on behalf of the landowner of Lot 811 Tipper Court and in support of the officer's recommendation. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the comprehensive review that the City's officers have undertaken and subsequent collaboration to arrive at a proposal that both parties are comfortable with. By way of background, this proposal was initially lodged with the City in February 2019 and subsequently considered by Council on the 12th of February 2020, where it was resolved to defer consideration of the scheme amendment pending the preparation of a retail sustainability assessment, which examines the impact of the proposal on existing and contemplated activity centres, including the land uses proposed within the 3A precinct. Subsequent to this resolution, the applicant has undertaken considerable expense by engaging economists Praxis to prepare the retail sustainability assessment. The findings of the retail sustainability assessment are positive and conclude that the proposal would not have an unsustainable impact on the viability of existing and contemplated activity centres within the catchment area. I'd like to address the matter of sewer availability. We acknowledge that this precinct is dedicated as a dry industry until such time as sewer is brought past the site, and we remain cognizant of that fact. Our client is committed to exploring opportunities to extend the sewer. With respect to the structure plan referred to by my colleague previously, the structure plan does acknowledge, with the extension of Lloyd Street, that the evolving nature of land uses along that extension may change over time. This site doesn't lend itself to general industry because it's previously been, I guess, carved up as a result of the Lloyd Street extension. It's a relatively small industrial site, and due to the positioning of it on the corner of Bushmead Road and Lloyd Street, it's actually going to have a greater level of traffic passing by it than the peripheral 3A precinct. Therefore, you have to question the viability of such uses on the fringe within this precinct. Praxis's initial work also included benchmarking the Hazelmere enterprise area against similar industrial precincts to determine the level of comparative level of services and amenities available to the local workforce. The report concluded that the Hazelmere enterprise area is substantially deficient in available services such as fuel retail, health and community, and recreational uses compared to other industrial precincts within Western Australia. Since preparation of the retail sustainability assessment, we've worked closely with the City staff to understand outstanding concerns relating to the range of land uses sought by this scheme amendment and have subsequently agreed to modify our proposal to admit land uses such as shop, medical centre and showroom. We are comfortable with the range of land uses and use permissibility proposed by the City, and once adopted, the scheme amendment will facilitate a small-scale commercial development that will significantly improve the level of services and amenity available to the local workforce. In this regard, we have received a number of letters of support from local businesses outlining their desire to see such uses in a easily accessible location such as this, and I've provided those in my written deputation, which I believe has been circulated to elected members. In reading the City's report and recommendation to Council, it is evident that the City's officers have undertaken a thorough review of the proposal and has given due regard to all matters of consideration, including the planning framework and the question of retail viability. We thank the City for this and provide our support for the proposed recommendation to initiate the scheme amendment to facilitate consultation with key stakeholders in the community. Thank you, and I welcome any questions that you may have.
Okay. Thank you, councillors. Now, any questions of the speakers? Councillor Coley, questions to...
Mike on the stand there at the moment, thank you.
Okay, we'll deal with Mr Davis. I'll take your question.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm interested in what he means by my client would be willing to explore opportunities to extend the sewer. I'm not too sure what that means
Okay.
and how that might hold up future development.
Okay. Mr Davis, if you'd like to answer that question.
Well, there's the opportunity to, I guess, work with Landcorp to fund the extension of the sewer. Should that be viable? It may be sort of a shorter, medium-term sort of proposition. I think the officer's report also refers to the fact that there's the ability to explore on-site effluent disposal systems, which may also be viable under the government sewerage policy. So there's a number of options that wouldn't preclude this proposal moving forward.
Any further questions, councillors, of Mr Davis? Okay. Thank you, Mr Davis. Any councillors' questions, Mr Hunt? Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, we now go to item 4.4, which is the Responsible Authority Report for a proposed educational establishment, primary school at lot number 49, number 51, lot 48, number 53, lot 47, number 55, Harper Street, Woodbridge. A number of speakers here, and the first one being Mr Wayne Dydron against the proposal. He has also submitted a written deputation. So, Mr Dryden, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you to the Council for this opportunity to speak. It's a bit short and sweet because I didn't quite realise that I was doing both a written and a verbal presentation. But we'd just like to reiterate the broad objection to the proposed Steiner School and support of the Council staff report that the school not be approved based on the concerns around the impact of traffic upon the street and surrounding area. Sorry, just want to get that off mute. Basically, it's a nice, quiet residential street. The impact of the additional traffic coming through, particularly at the peak hours, is of major concern to us. And I'd like to point out that the increased traffic will detract from the quiet residential amenity of the street. The WAPC's own recommendations require a minimum of 3 road frontages to facilitate suitable safe access, and makes it clear that cul-de-sac roads are not suitable in providing access for school sites, and the proposed Harper Street is inconsistent with this draft. The proposed Harper Street policy is inconsistent with this draft policy, and the city staff could not be satisfied that the traffic generated from the proposed school will not cause queuing and congestions on the Poynton Avenue and Harper Street. And for these reasons, it is inconsistent with the objectives of the residential zone to preserve and enhance a safe and attractive residential environment.
Thank you, Mr Dryden.
Sorry?
Have you finished?
Oh, just about.
Oh, sorry.
And anecdotally, in the last few days, there's been some roadworks on Morrison Road, which has redirected morning traffic down that street, and it has given us a taste of what it would be like to have that on a regular basis, and it is a dramatic increase in the noise of a nice, quiet back street in the suburb that we've all purchased to live in, and does make it dangerous for those of us trying to pull out onto the road with that kind of traffic. And if this proposal was to go through, once that is being built and there's been no way of managing this road traffic, it's a Pandora's box that just can't be closed, particularly getting out onto Morrison Road, getting out onto Great Eastern Highway. Already this high school traffic from the local regional high schools causes traffic problems, and to add the additional traffic from the school would just make it infinitely worse. And that's basically it.
Thank you, Mr Dryden. If you take a seat, we might have some questions for you later. The next speaker is Mr Patrick Irwin from Patrick Irwin Architects, speaking against the recommendation and in support of the proposal. He is provided with the written deputation and is also presenting person. Mr Irwin, I'm sure you know the drill.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Hello, councillors, and hello to our new CEO. Welcome aboard. My position is interesting in that I live directly across the road from the site on Harper Street and have lived there for 23 years. So I know this location extremely well. I know the floodplain, and which is one of the great assets for the site. And I've worked on that for 20-odd years as part of the Blackadder Woodbridge Catchment Group doing restoration work. So I know the asset value of the site. I know the peculiarities of the site in terms of the landfill which has occurred there. We've got up to 4.5 to 5 metres of fill in places. So there's quite a lot of issues that I'm well aware of, and I've been thinking about how to work on this site. I've actually designed a house myself for one of these sites. So I've thought about it a great deal. And so I have this advantage in bringing a good design to this package, and which was a great thing when I started working with the school, with Tanami here, because we're on the same... Tanami had the same idea of working on a deck system to keep above the ground. And also, right from the beginning, Tanami had the same idea that there's a public car park 60 metres, 60.3 metres from the boundary of our site, our proposed site, to the car park, which is only really the distance of the depth of each of these blocks. So it's not far. And I had the opportunity to talk today to Charles Taylor, who was the principal at Foothills School in Guildford, which in many ways is a similar site. He had 5 car bays on site, one of which was a loading bay. He said he had no problems with parking on Swan Street in Guildford, except when they had parents' nights and some people parked in front of one particular lady's Verge, and she complained. They had 110 students at the maximum, and we have 18 car bays on site. In our proposal, we have about a dozen Verge car bays shown on our proposal, and the car park itself could accommodate about 70 cars if it had marked bays on it. That's Crosby Road car park. So the difference here is chalk and cheese, and if we're allowed to pursue our traffic management proposal, which is to get the kids dropped off and picked up from the Crosby Road car park, the parking situation would be quite calm. And our friend here has just referred today to the parking being detoured down Harper Street from Morrison Road, because there's been roadworks on Morrison Road. Now, what I noticed, there was no traffic jam ensuing. It was busy, I agree, but there was no traffic jam. Now,
The road was blocked off.
yeah, but the on Morrison Road, yeah. But the situation we already, as also Wayne here said, that we already have a lot of traffic from Govo coming down Harper Street. Now that's something over 1,000 kids there. We're not infinitely going to increase that number. The increase of our school, which is probably roughly a tenth of the amount of students, is not going to be a huge difference to the amount of traffic that already ordinarily uses that road. So what I'm saying is the report here generally supports the design approach we've taken. The main issue in the officer's report is the concerns over parking and traffic. And I think if we could accept that the car park is effectively a public car park, can be used as a public car park, and that traffic can deal sensibly with the situation we have, it can be quite an amenable situation. Certainly if you compare it to Foothills, which was a successful school for the time it ran, in a similar situation, that was strictly one way in, one way out. Harper Street is not one way in, one way out. It can be on a circular loop, sort of one-way sort of run-round system. So, you know, we don't necessarily have to have many cars turning around and going back out the way they came. So what I'm saying here is the concept is sound.
Can you wrap up, Mr. Hearn, because that is your 5 minutes?
Yep. And I would ask the council to support our proposals and go for option B.
Thank you,
Option
Mr. Hearn.
two.
Just take a seat. We'll have some may have some questions for you. Next speaker is Ms Tanamai Magnus, the principal of Alina River Steiner School, speaking against the recommendation and in support of the proposal. Thank you, Ms Magnus.
Thank you. Good evening. My apologies to everybody. I could not find my other mask, and this one doesn't work that well, so I'm going to have to hold it like this. So my name's Tanamai Magnus. I'm the principal of Alina River Steiner School. I'm also the co-founder of the school. I grew up in Guildford and left for a few years in early adulthood and returned back to Guildford many years ago. My mother and father and sister and brother all live in Guildford. I'm a long-time resident. I'm very involved in this area and obviously have a lot of love for this area, hence wanting to start a Steiner school, which I'm a Steiner teacher, in this area where I could ride to work and my child could ride to school. So I'm urging you all, obviously, to support our application. We do not wish to make life difficult for residents. We would like to find a way that it does work for everybody. We find it's an ideal site in so many ways for our small independent school. So the City of Swan planners gave two main reasons in their RA for recommending refusal. These are, one, the volume of traffic estimated to be generated by the school would adversely impact upon the residents. And number two, our failure to model the impact of traffic generated in the year 2031. So in response to the first point, our very first, I will be repeating some of what Patrick says. Our very first consultations with the City of Swan planners were around the use of the Crosby Street car park, which is a free public car park, 24-hour car park that is day and night unused. If anything, I see one car there. And as Patrick said, it's 60 metres away from the site. So, our original concept was that we would have a policy whereby parents would enter Harper Street from the west, drop their children at the car park and exit via Poynton or back along Harper Street. Okay. So, and which would alleviate any traffic going along the cul-de-sac. There would not be any additional traffic going along the cul-de-sac if that was the case. So, and in reality, that is what will happen if the proposal goes ahead. It's a free public car park that has lots of space. So the city planners were resistant to us using the car park in case the city wants to sell it in the future. As it's on floodplain and it's the only entrance to Ray Marshall Park, it seems highly unlikely at any stage in the future. And if it were, well, perhaps we could revisit other ways that we could increase our parking. So anyway, we needed to demonstrate that we could do all of our pickups and drop-offs and staff and visitor parking confined within our own frontage. So it was pushing us into an arrangement which would have an adverse effect on the residents there, which we didn't want and they didn't want. Nevertheless, we tried to satisfy them. So we did redesign, creating more parking spaces on site, which not only complies with but exceeds the city's own parking guidelines. As our traffic impact assessment states, we have obtained a 5-year renewable lease with the Water Corp for their use of the section of Crosby Street car park. This was received on the 9th of September and provides a further 14 car bays. So now we're up to 32. These were shown in the revised designs submitted on the 4th of January as requested. So I note that the RA says that they don't know any details about this, but we did share it with them as soon as we got that lease, and it was subsequently included in the revised plans. And it was mentioned in the revised traffic impact assessment, which was due the day after or something. So obviously they were able to put in as much detail as they could. Regarding community feeling, as is often the case, those in favour of any given project are not as vocal as those who object. Before the city's own consultation process, we did our own consultation process, which was overwhelmingly positive. Ms Magnus,
I'll ask you to wrap up because that's your 5 minutes.
Right, is that 5 minutes right now,
Yeah.
or am I wrapping up now?
You just wrap it up with a single statement. Have you got much to go?
Oh, a little bit.
Okay, I'll give you another minute if you.
Okay, so you got the written report, lots of favourable comments, lots of people saying this would be a fantastic idea to have this in this area. Okay, so for the second port, that we failed to provide the 2031 modelling, this was requested by the City of Swan just over 2 weeks before it was due. So it was requested about 2 or 3 months after our initial application, and it was requested with a very, very short deadline. And the traffic consultant, it takes over 2 weeks to even have that information released from Main Road. So it was impossible for us to provide that. We're totally happy to if we're given more time. But what he did say very clearly was that those intersections have decreased in traffic. He could show that very clearly that it has decreased in traffic since the last reports, and so therefore anything that our school would be on top of that would just be very, very marginal.
And that's
Okay.
your minute.
All right, that's my minute. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillors, any questions of any of the speakers? Thank you all very much. The next item is item 4.5, which is the proposed clubhouse and access driveway on site for former Caversham Racing Circuit at lot 802 West Swan Road, West Swan. And we have a number of written councillors that you would have already received. And the first speaker will be Ms Cheryl Rogers against the proposal. Thank you, Ms Rogers. You had 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors. My name is Cheryl Rogers. I'm a local farmer and writer, and my background is in biological science and journalism. I object to the recommendations described in option 1 and fully support option 2 that this proposal be refused. Public awareness of bushfire danger is high and raw, both locally and globally. The combined Wooroloo, Yarloop and Roleystone Kelmscott fires has seen loss of life, habitat and 339 homes. The Roleystone fire was allegedly started by a spark from an angle grinder. Therefore, I respectfully ask that you consider the justification for approving a car workshop with welders and angle grinders in a designated fire risk zone on the eastern side of a Bush Forever site where the prevailing summer winds include easterlies, southeasterlies and northeasterlies. This has the potential to put at risk not only the local residents, including those at the caravan park, but the western side of Bush Forever Site 200, Whiteman Park, Dayton, Brabham and beyond, not to mention our old friend, the high-pressure above-ground APA gas metering station on the blind Dogleg Bend on Harrow Street. I would urge you to ask your constituents, particularly those in Gidgegannup and Averley, evacuated in the early hours of the morning, what they think of this combination of circumstances. Even people in Dayton behind us were frightened. The fire front didn't get there, but the smoke did, and a lot of those people don't have a lot of fire awareness. Now, the designated bushfire-prone zone is covered under the Department of Planning's website with some very strict guidelines. Battle axe and cul-de-sac developments are not recommended. The minimum access road required would be a width of 6 metres, and I understand this is to allow for the safe passing of fire vehicles. And there are also asset protection zones of low fuel load around buildings to consider. I find no mention of this in the submission, and that would necessarily create the need to clear much more of the native vegetation than we've been led to believe. The impact on native fauna and the Bush Forever Site 200 in the report also deserves comment. The comment that city staff are not clear how the use of 4,000 square metres of cleared land within a 67-hectare lot will adversely impact native fauna. To that I offer the example of Phytophthora or Jarrah dieback. It's microscopic, it's insidious, it's soil-borne, and it's transmitted on the tyres of motor vehicles and by foot traffic. Now, although Jarrah dieback is the common name, Bankshires are also severely affected by this, and the Bankshire woodlands in Bush Forever Site 200 are recognised as an endangered ecological community, afforded national significance and protected by a federal government act, the EPBC Act. Late last year, satellite surveillance caught out a Bullsbrook market gardener who illegally cleared native vegetation, and he copped an $18,000 fine. State and local government is not above this law. Also, the comment in the report that the frequency of use may scare off kangaroos, or it may not. This sort of arrogance and environmental ignorance will not be accepted by the wider scientific community out in the real world. We're in the 21st century now. If the city is going to be making recommendations affecting environmentally sensitive issues, it needs to up its scientific intelligence. I sympathise with the car club's need to find a permanent home and wish it well, but a Bush Forever site in a designated fire risk zone is not an appropriate place.
Thank you, Ms Rogers. Just take a seat. We may have questions for you. Next speaker is Ms Jan Zek, also speaking against the proposal. Thank you, Ms Zek.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors, for the opportunity to make this presentation. Has everyone received a copy of my notes? Oh, they're going around. Let me say at the beginning, I do not have a problem with the VSCC developing club rooms. I'm sure involvement in the club is a great boon to many people. I'm sure, sorry, and my glasses are fogging up with the mask. And as it seems to be the realm mainly of males, perhaps a great number of them are retired, I'm reminded of a statement made by an old friend of mine on the retirement of her husband. I married him for better or worse, but not lunch every day. So I can imagine that there are many wives who are also in great support of the club rooms being established. My concern is that the site currently in question is so restrictive, despite the view promoted by the city staff that the site is cleared and of some 4,000 square metres, only 4 quarter-acre blocks in the old currency. The documents presented by the VSCC in support of its application clearly show vegetation on the site. So much, in fact, that when the second lot of documents appeared, the club rooms being moved further away from the northern boundary, the former vegetation was substantially manicured to allow for the parking on the site to be accommodated. Oh, and by the way, by my reckoning, the site is only about 3,600 square metres and of such a shape with a couple of acute angles in the boundary that it makes using the space effectively nigh on impossible. The site is also a battle axe block, something that the authorities are moving away from for a number of reasons, not least of which is the access in case of bushfire. The problem with this configuration is that there is a long access road required to get to the proposed clubroom, and in doing so would require the removal of considerable amount of vegetation. For fire and emergency vehicles access, the roadway would need to be 6 metres in width. This would occupy a whopping 20% or 1/5 of the former York Street Reserve, which I understand is part of the Bush Forever Site 2000 and has been for the last 20 years. The latest comments from the VSCC state that the access road will need to be moved to the southern boundary, but this is hard to comprehend without substantive qualification. The drawing I prepared has now become redundant, but I will include it here as the principles that support it haven't changed, and you'll find it, I think, on the next page. The drawing is as near as I can get to accurate, an extremely taxing process considering that every drawing supplied seems to be of a different scale and proportions. I have constructed a drawing using the measurements given, so if these have been rounded off, there is likely to be some discrepancy, but I think only minor. The drawing shows two factors that will need to be considered when assessing the appropriateness of the proposed development on this site. The VSCC has already flagged that a sealed road would be required to be installed for the use of emergency vehicles. This road would also be required to include turnaround areas so a fire truck is not stuck on the site, unable to get out in an emergency. I looked at this and thought the best solution, perhaps the only solution, would be to provide a circuit the whole way around the building, as it is easy to keep moving in the same direction and difficult to find adequate space to install turnaround areas big enough to accommodate the length of a fire truck. This roadway takes up about 927 square metres, some of which has been already reduced to 5 metres. The other issue with the site is that a second exit is required because of bushfire risk management. This is not possible due to the bushland to the west, unless it tracks over the rest of the Bush Forever Site 2000 to get clear. And then this would also be required to be sealed, not what was intended for a Bush Forever site. On the subject of bushfire management, it is now recommended that an asset protection zone be created around the building to minimise risk. This zone extends 20 metres out from the building. It is shown in the green hatch on my drawing. Due to the size of the building, the area in total, including the building, is 3,280 square metres. This would require the removal of much of the vegetation and thinning out of the remainder. If we throw in the parking, say 45 cars at 15.6 square metres per bay, we have another 702 square metres committed.
Thank you, Ms Eck. That's your 5 minutes.
Oh, is it?
Yep.
Oh, lucky I gave you all the notes then. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Questions?
Don't go anywhere. We haven't finished with you yet, I don't think. Just take a seat. We might have some questions. Okay, the next speaker is Mr Jeff de Cruz, speaking against the proposal. Thank you, Mr Cruz. You've got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and good evening, councillors and staff. My name is Jeff de Cruz, and I live in Westbourne Road, and I object to the proposal. I've chosen to address just the issues raised in the club's subsequent submission, rather than go back to the original, and I have provided each councillor with my original submission. So I'll just deal with the issues on the second submission. The VSCC, and I'll just call them the club from now on, claimed that the D Circuit track is listed as on the heritage list. Now, we've checked this, and as of August 2019, it hasn't been. In their own newsletter, the club state that the track is allowed to degrade significantly. We asked the question, why haven't they maintained it? They're making such a big issue of this thing, so why haven't they maintained it? The VSC state that they can now supply further information. Well, they've had one go at it, they've had a second go at it. Why don't they provide all that information up front so we can deal with it? Our problem was, in the initial submission, we gained our knowledge and information in lodging our deputation. They come back at a second bite, so that's why I'm dealing with this now. The VSC questioned the percentage of inhabitants of the caravan park that signed the petition, in terms of what percentage had signed the petition. What relevance is that? I mean, they've said 32 signatures were obtained. Does it matter? One signature, as far as I'm concerned, is adequate. So the significance should not be downgraded as suggested by them. An assumption has been made that the WAPC considered the planning implications and Bush Forever before offering the VSCC a lease. Has this been verified? We don't know, and we doubt it. The VSCC has claimed the signed petition by transient or temporary residents is not really appropriate or relevant. How do we make that judgment? And how do we know they're all transient or temporary? And I'll let the next speaker address that issue. This is completely false, and as several of the residents have permanent houses on the property. The VSCC claimed that they do not intend to make excessive noise at the moment. One does have to consider how long is at the moment mean. The VSCC claimed the building would be rated as commercial, which raises the bar for acceptable noise levels in a Bush Forever zone, and the adverse impact on the neighbours. The club also claims that vehicle noise between 10 and 10:30, while at best occasional, will be from licensed vehicles at the same level. This will have a serious impact on our amenity, as at present no vehicles travel along our boundary, day or night. The club claims that before any event that generates excessive noise would be run, they would consider consultation and planning. By their own admission, the VSCC do not intend having events that create. VSCC do intend having events that create excessive noise. The club's operating hours, as specified, hardly represents a challenge to the nearby neighbours. We were not consulted on this, and yes, we strongly object to any after-hours activity, given our birds and their aviaries that allow noise and light to affect them. We regard ourselves as everyday people who chose to purchase this property that borders on bushland away from civilization, so that we can contribute to the conservation of threatened, vulnerable and endangered species of birds. Many of our birds are in these categories, including being on the CITES list. CITES stands for the Convention of the International Trade on Endangered Species. As birds would be disturbed day and night, the possibility of their ever breeding will be zero. As such, we do not appreciate any organisation being parachuted onto the adjoining bushland to remove native fauna and erect buildings in a fire-prone zone. Seems completely contradictory to the preservation of nature. The VSCC has stated that the Wanneroo Circuit has much greater significance to most of our members and prospective members than the narrow ribbon of bumpy tarmac running through the bush behind the Swan Valley Tourist Park. That's the issue of February 2020. As such, we would suggest the D Circuit is not as significant as they claim, and an alternative venue should be sought. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz. If you'd like to take a seat. Next speaker on this is Mr. Richard Roy, who is a resident of the acclaimed Holiday Park, speaking on behalf of the residents of the park. He's also submitted a written deputation. So, thank you, Mr. Roy.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors, for the opportunity to speak against this proposal. I, as all of the signatories on the said petition, are permanent residents, our home forever, not temporary or transient, of whom I represent the permanent. Because of the negative impact that the Vintage Car Club has proposed, the activities associated with this club and other associated clubs such as the Men's Shed will have an impact on the current amenities that we have chosen to live near and the location, in particular the bush forever, will be impacted by the shrinking of the natural habitat of fauna and flora under this proposal. With the noise of the Vintage Car Club, but other associated clubs, the arrival and departure of vehicles will be significant on most days. Thus, the proposed access road is going to be sealed. I think it may be eventually. This is not what we wanted for our location, constant dust. Lighting, most nights, we have chosen the peace and quiet, bush forever, and we have this pollution. View, our chosen location of bush forever, the uninterrupted view of fauna and flora will be shattered. We collectively did not choose this location to have this important aspect of our daily living shrink and impact the fauna and flora. Some of our community and clubs do not understand bush forever. Because of the noise, the dust, the light, it has been suggested that a solid fence will be erected in place of the wire fence. What about the view we chose and paid for? Do we enjoy it now? Not likely. The risk, the fire, it's obvious. Do I need to say any more? I think enough's been said. Waste management, stormwater, how will this proposal not impact neighbours, given the cost involved and consideration to the nature, fauna and fauna, bush forever, to effectively achieve this goal. I've been advised that 25 parking bays will be allocated for the Vintage Car Club. They have 400 members. How many associated clubs and other members? Whilst it is acknowledged that excess parking will use the old track, which is not sealed, for overflow parking, the Vintage Car Club has also stated that the old track will not be used for regular events at this time. There is no guarantee it will not be used for regular events in the future. Irrespective of its human nature, I can see the parking is full, so I'll park at the garage or the caravan park entrance. She'll be right, mate. No problem. We already have concerns regarding unauthorised parking in parking set aside for acclaimed caravan park business and activities. Not accounting for the spoiling of amenities with rubbish tossed out of windows of trucks and vehicles, and the blocking of the access to 6741 dead opposite the Caltex garage. Compounding the risk is the fact that within 150 metres you have 10 entry exits, some shared, and we're going to put another one in right by where the bus stop is that's shared with the exit from the garage and the trucks pull in to have their lunch. Council would appear to support another devastating black spot under their control. Health. Going forward, the elderly residents have some significant health concerns. We have one resident who is 89. She has significant health concerns that she's got to deal with daily, including terminal cancer. And outside her back door, she's going to have a fence and a bloody great building stuck there. This is her forever home. How is that fair? It's been like that for 20 years. Does not anyone understand bush
Thank you,
forever?
Mr. Roy. That's your 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I could say more, but...
Just make the point, the officer's recommendation is for refusal. Make that aware. Okay, the last speaker is Mr. Brian Eyre from the Vintage Sports Car Club in support of the proposal. Thank you, Mr. Eyre.
Thank you, councillors and the Mayor, for the chance to speak tonight. It's quite a surprise to see the amount of opposition that we've been sort of thrown at. But basically, I won't go through our representation because I'm sure that you've actually received a copy of those. But I will just say that we did object to the recommendations on the grounds that we can supply further information addressing a lot of the concerns, and we are willing to liaise with City of Swan staff and Caravan Park and nearby residents. It's just this is a proposal, and we've only got that far. We did question the validity of the petition for the Caravan Park because we know that they were canvassed, and we don't know the wording or the intent of the petition. We did object to option 2 on the ground that the land was owned by the WA Planning Commission, who had a long-term idea for this proposal. This proposal's been going on for nearly 15 years, and the implications for the planning and the bush forever have been considered and are being taken accord to. I just want to address some of the speakers. There's no bushfire risk. It's a clubroom workshop which will have limited use. We have put in a bushfire management plan, and that bushfire management plan has a number of recommendations. In regard to parking on site, we've actually reviewed the parking. It was being suggested that we can use the existing track for parking, and that's what we would do. And that would also address the runoff on the site as far as stormwater and drainage goes. The 6 metre width for access road, I think, would probably be a bonus, because if there is a bushfire, the truck can't get into the moment anyway. And we would exit via the existing track as a second exit. In regard to one of the other speakers, well, I won't actually address that. The last speaker, some of the points were, we've got 400 members, but not 400 members attend the meetings. You know, they were from all over the state. We might have 50 people attend a meeting, and that's once a month. We've also got a committee meeting that runs once a week, and in the proposal that we've got, this club room will only get limited. It's not going to be used every day. It won't get used every night. And we've also addressed the issue of stray lighting, you know, just going to put solar panels in. So I don't think there was any other items that we needed to address other than what was addressed in our reply to the Council's recommendations. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eyre. Any questions, councillors? Any of the speakers? Councillor Henderson.
Thank you to Mr. Eyre, if I may.
Okay, Mr. Eyre, if you just stay there for a minute.
Sorry?
Yeah, I just asked Mr. Eyre to stay at the microphone.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
The Caversham Air Base site, it's my understanding that the club had a very long-term lease over the land. Was that the whole site or just a part of the site?
No, the lease the land belongs to the WA Planning Commission.
I realise, but
And
before that,
Councillor
the
Henderson.
federal government.
Councillor Henderson, I'll
Yes.
ask you to address your questions to the chair, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Further
I thought I was
question?
asking him the question,
Further
but anyhow. Before that, the federal government owned land. My understanding was there was a long-term lease over that land. Is that correct?
No, we don't. We're only just being asked to complete a lease agreement as we speak, and the lease agreement would only be for that small plot of land where we want to put a club room. The Bush Forever site will remain with WA Planning Commission and Whiteman Park. We're not going to destroy any bush. There's no encroachment onto the Bush Forever site. There's one tree on the plot that we would like to remove, and that's regrowth and a fallen regrowth at that.
Okay, so...
Do you have a further question, Councillor Henderson?
I do,
I'll hear
thank you, Mr Mayor. So the current lease arrangement for the eastern side of that plot that you're currently working on, what term is that lease for, roughly?
We don't have a lease at the moment. We're working on getting a lease.
Right, thank you.
Yep.
Where, Mr Mayor, another question, where would people park should there be a race event?
Well, at the moment, we're not proposing that there would be a race event. The whole idea was that we would move in and look after the track and at least do some restoration work, because it's literally gone to rack and ruin, and that the Swanshire may use that as a cycle track in the future. So we would, we may, you know, we would like to run an event on that, but I work for a mob called Rally West, and we organise Targa West, rallies down south, and our club also runs Albany and Northam. We take over the whole town for one day, and we do it properly, and we do it under regulations. So if we were going to run an event, it would be done under the recommendations and guidelines and in consultation with the local members.
Thank you, Mayor. If I may expand on
question?
that. Yeah.
Okay, I'll hear it.
I understand the point. My reading and my understanding was that you would be holding events from time to time, and the part of the new road may be used as part of the track. So if that's the case, I really need to know where people would park. But I understand that you would do that as an event and you would work all that out, but I'd try to get an idea of what that might be.
Well, at the moment we've changed the requirements for car parking in that we would use the old track just for club meetings. If there was going to be an event, we've got the whole area of not Yildeen Road, the new road that's going to come through. This is a 10-year plan, you know. I mean, you're not going to have cars running around the old track next week. This will be done in consultation. And when we run an event, we actually go and talk to people. You know, we ask them to move their horses to the back of the paddock and tell them what's going on. Surely one day a week is not going to be a big event. I mean, in Ellenbrook, the whole town comes in and everybody has a great old time. Everybody watches the cars goes around and they all go home. And the Swan Shire actually supports that notion. So there's a lot of mistruths going around at the moment about what's actually going to happen out there. You know, we're going to knock down all the trees and the fire. It's going to produce a fire hazard, and so I'm not too sure where all this is coming from. But you know, the club's quite willing to consult and talk to people. It's
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Eyre. Councillor Kiley, you've got a question, Mr. Eyre.
Through you, Mayor. Mr. Eyre, thank you for making a deputation. I'm interested in the impact on the local fauna. With the driveway going in, would that then be opened up to the whole Bush Forever site? I mean, would there be an access gate that has to be closed off upon entry? Or would it, as you've currently proposed, I gather that it's just going to be an open access to West Swan Road, is that correct?
No, it'll be gated. The WA Planning Commission has recommended that we change the roadway from the northern to the southern side. That's actually not our preferred because it has more effect on the caravan park. And then there's a shared zone for the bus area, you know, which will be which was one of the main concerns as well.
So
there would be a gate at that. Kangaroos can't get out on the West Swan Road.
You got a further question, Councillor Colling?
Just so I understand clearly that you would have a gate where individual cars would have to stop, get out and open the gate and close the gate behind them every time they access the site?
Yes, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kalana, you've got a question.
Sorry.
Question up here,
how
thanks,
often
Councillor.
how often do you have the events? Sorry. You know, how often do you have the where you use the track? I can't actually see. You did mention it. How often do you?
We don't use the track at all at the moment.
So what are Ellenbrook people coming down to do then? You mentioned that Ellenbrook people were coming down.
Oh, that's in the city of Ellenbrook. That's for the Target West.
Oh, that's another one. That's
Yeah,
not
that's
to do with
another
this
event. No,
site
that's
here.
not our event.
Councillor Kalana, can you address your questions to the chair, please? Thank
Yes, okay.
Thank
well, you know, I'm trying to ask
Well,
this gentleman
the
some
process
questions.
is you ask the questions to the chair, so if you could do that, and I'll direct the questions to Mr. Eyre. Thank you.
Okay, well, now I've lost my train of thought. Why do you need to have the clubhouse at that particular site if you're not using the track?
Because it's been a long-term goal of the club to preserve the heritage and history of that particular club. And at the moment, it's just being left to go to rack and ruin. So, you know, if we've got a presence there, then we can go and do some... last year or 2 years ago, we had to get in and clear the track from either side because of a bushfire risk. So we would do all of those things, and we've actually got a source that says they could possibly resurface the track, remembering that we would plan an event once a year at the track, a historic racing event.
Any further questions of Mr. Eyre? Councillor Johnson, I'll hear your question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to ask Mr. Eyre a question, if that's all right.
Well, let's councillors, let's get the process clear here. If you don't believe me, you can overlook in your orders. Your questions are directed to the chair, through the chair to Mr. Eyre. So you will ask me the question.
Mr. Mayor, this is a new process for this evening, I understand.
Well, no, it's not, councillor. Just go back to have a look at your meeting procedures. Have always been you ask questions to the chair.
Read the standing orders, Councillor Johnson.
I am doing, but
okay,
Mr. Mayor, you're imposing something
let's
here.
not get off the track here. Can you please ask me your question, councillor?
All right. So the question through you to Mr. Mayor is the usual procedure following our standing orders. Is Mr. Can you heard the representative from the housing caravan park, I think it is that correct, next door, indicate that a fence was going to go up that was going to distress of residents. Can you tell us more about that? Is that the case? And would you, if so, would you consider modifying the fence?
Thank you, Mr. Eyre.
Okay, the changing of the fence is a new one on me. It was recommended, I think, from the council that maybe there would be a buffer wall along that side. So I'm not too sure. I mean, the VSCC is quite happy to do that if that's what's required. But at the moment, one of the residents actually objected to the fact that there would be a wall there because he wouldn't be able to see the bush forever. So I'm not too sure where we're going with that. But once again, that's a consultation process. We're not saying yay or nay. It's, this is part of the process.
Further question, Councillor McNamara.
Staff, Mr.
Okay, we'll be taking the usual staff questions after. Councillor Richards, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question just to Mr. Eyre, through you.
Yep, thank you. I'll hear it.
Can I just ask if the club room is intends to store vehicles there, and if so, how many? And also memorabilia, like is it going to be set up as a club room internally where have your collection, and will there be vehicles stored there?
It's not the plan to have any vehicles there. Sometimes there's a restoration project, and that's what would occur in the workshop, but that's not a running vehicle. There's no fuel or oil there. It's just as repairs are being done. That's what happens in our existing club rooms. And the other part of the question was?
You have memorabilia on site?
Oh yes, we do have memorabilia at the existing club rooms. At the moment, we will remove the memorabilia because of the continuous break-ins, and it's now in storage. So the idea would be that we would have somewhere that would be nice to have somewhere to put that memorabilia back up. So when the members come out for a meeting, they can see all that stuff there. Some of it's very valuable and not easily replaced.
That's what I was concerned through you, Mr. Mayor.
Further question?
A question about that particular one car park or one bay for restoration. That car could be there for a long period of time being restored?
Could be there 3 months.
Any further questions, Mr. Eyre? Yes, Councillor Henderson, I'll hear your question.
Mayor, if Mr. Eyre could respond, has the club received a grant for the works and the like that you want to do?
Mr. Eyre, no?
So,
question?
No, I mean, the whole process has been a bit of an eye-opener. This was a proposal, and the idea was the proposal would be put forward, and then we would seek grants and look for other funding. It would be we can self-fund it, but it would be nice to have some financial help, and that's been indicated from some of the bodies that are concerned or happy to help us.
Thank you, Mr. Eyre. Councillor Zanino, you got a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, wouldn't it be a better proposition for the club to locate its clubhouse on Whiteman Park? Obviously, you've chosen this site because of the track, but you've stated that you're not going to be really using the track. You'd only be using it once a year. So if the club was located in Whiteman Park, it wouldn't be disturbing anybody. You could carry out your weekly, monthly, whatever meetings, and then you could still restore the old track and put in an application to use or have an event once a year on the track.
Mr.
Eyre? Okay. In our planning process, we did consider Whiteman Park. A couple of reasons we didn't choose it is because Whiteman Park has restricted hours. I think it's at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock the gate's shut, so then we wouldn't be able to have our meetings at night. There's also other restrictions. Whiteman Park management's quite onerous. We would like to have our own sort of governance. In relation to maintaining the track is already in disrepair. Every year it gets worse and worse. The rain gets in and eats out the top surface. There are drainage problems there, so all of those things could be issued. We have regular working bees, and the guys actually like to come out and do those things. We make a special effort to go around to the track and walk around the track and see what needs to be done. Because, as I say, this is a historic track, Australian Grand Prix circuit, and at the moment it's just being left to its own devices and nobody's going to look after it. So surely history has some, there needs to be somebody looking after the heritage and history of the area, particularly for Swan. I mean, I can remember coming up to Caversham as a boy, so a lot of other people probably do as well.
Thank you, Mr Eyre. Councillor Richardson, you had another question?
Two quick questions for you, Mr Mayor. Just to Mr Eyre. How would the type of proposed security for the site, you mentioned that there's been a few break-ins, you've got this valuable memorabilia, how would they address that?
Mr Eyre?
Say again, I didn't...
Councillor Richardson, how are you going to maintain the security of the memorabilia that you've got there in the new building?
That's a really big issue at the moment. We're having probably a break-in every 3 weeks, and hopefully the site would actually be better, because as the area develops, there'll be less and less people wandering around looking for something to do, and it would be a real shame if somebody got in and got into the memorabilia, because, as I say, it's not replaceable. It's.
In terms of security, though, and alarm system.
We have a monitored alarm at our current club site, and basically what happens is when the alarm goes off, a security person comes into the site and has a look.
Cameras as well.
We've got cameras as well, yes.
I just noted that last second question from you, Mr Mayor, was in terms of the club have a licence for alcohol or the provision for serving alcohol?
I don't think so. I'd have to check that one.
Functions and events?
We would probably get a licence for functions, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr Eyre. Are there any questions, Councillor, of any other speakers? Councillor Congerton.
Thank you. My question to Mr Eyre.
Mr Eyre, apparently we've got another one. You better come back.
Sorry. Mr Eyre, through you, Mr Mayor. Mr Eyre, when was the track first commenced? How old are we talking here? I'm looking for the historical question.
In testing my memory now, I've actually done a report on this, but I can't actually remember the date. It was after the Second World War, when it was abandoned by the Air Force and the WA Sporting Car Club, which are now out at Wanneroo. They went in there and said, this would be nice to have a few cars race around it. And I think it went to the 1960s, and then the club was, the actual track was taken over by Defence Department for a radio room, and the WA Sporting Car Club went to Wanneroo. We have had a lot of thought about joining the people out at Wanneroo, but they've got different ideas and not the same as ours.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Henderson, you had another question. I'll make that one last one, Mr Eyre, because we need to move
on.
Staff. To staff, I can hold it. Okay. Councillor, any questions of any other speakers? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate your time. Give ourselves a little bit here. Okay, thank you, Councillor. Yes, Councillor McGrath.
With regard to the questions to staff, it was normal that questions were asked of staff immediately on the...
Staff are doing briefings on items open to questions at the end. Councillors, we've been doing that now for a couple of months.
Yeah, we've been doing it, but it was never actually moved. When was it changed?
About 3 months ago, I would suggest. As soon as we started COVID, we went to the staff briefing at the end, so we've been doing it for a little while. So, thank you, Councillor. The next item is 4.6, replacement of the boundary fence and retaining wall at St Jude's Aged Care at Lot 6, number 26, Lot 151, number 28, Lot 350, number 30, Swan Street East, and Lot 2053, East Street, Guildford. First speaker is Miss Michelle Lewis, speaking against the recommendation. And Ms Lewis, I understand you're having trouble with your mask, so you may remove it to speak if you wish. And you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you and good evening, councillors and Mr Mayor. I'm an affected resident speaking against the staff recommendation. Approval of this application has much wider implications than simply the northern wall. It will have a flow-on effect to neighbours living next door to St Jude's, and it will impact on St Jude's residents who are currently sharing the facility with the builders. The plan that has been included in this application fails to show the works that are proposed on neighbouring family homes. The plans that I have here show the actual works that are proposed for our homes that the architect gave to us for the first time just a few days ago. There is a condition on the approval that says works must not extend off-site, yet this is exactly what is proposed. If you allow approval of the northern retaining wall, then it is expected that the builder can start digging to level the northern area of the site. However, earthworks cannot take place along the eastern boundary because a building permit for the eastern fences has not yet been granted. The builder would be unable to commit to a firm date for when earthworks would finish until such a time that permits along the eastern boundary are granted. Partial site works should not be allowed while so many critical issues remain unresolved. This uncertainty in the construction schedule raises multiple problems. It is likely to create a situation where site works are forced to go on hold while the eastern boundary issues continue. St Jude's residents and site neighbours should not be forced to live on or next to a construction site for an unknown period of time. Once digging begins, neighbours will be under even more pressure from the developer. We may find ourselves in a position where we are forced to accept the plans proposed for our homes because progressive site works may leave no other option. Perhaps most worryingly, it raises safety questions for St Jude's existing residents. The community has explained to you that it is not uncommon for St Jude's residents to leave the facility unsupervised, to then be found confused and disorientated in the private back gardens of neighbouring homes. While it is expected that the builder will take all reasonable actions to ensure that any building works are secure, history tells us that St Jude's dementia patients and residents suffering with severe mental health illnesses often find themselves in places that they shouldn't be. So I ask you, is it reasonable to expect the East Guildford community, which includes St Jude's residents, to live on or next to a major construction site with no idea of when construction works will finish? Is it fair to place neighbours in a position where they may be forced to accept works on their land despite a condition on the approval that says this cannot be allowed? Is it morally responsible to allow the works to progress with no confirmed end date, while knowing that the construction works may pose a safety risk to St Jude's vulnerable residents? The builder is already on site. They came on site at the start of the COVID lockdown last week, despite all visitors being banned from aged care and disability facilities other than for compassionate reasons. This was not essential work. The decision not to postpone the works during the current restrictions raises concerns about St Jude's judgment during the ongoing pandemic. The architects told us of a last-minute change to the demolition schedule today. The schedule has unexpectedly been brought forward. Demolition of a building containing asbestos, which is located a few metres from neighbours' bedrooms, starts tomorrow. The developer refuses to provide us with the asbestos management plan. I know that most councillors are well-intentioned and community-minded. I believe that many councillors are not aware of the highly stressful and distressing circumstances that neighbours have been living under for the last 18 months. It seems that approvals may have got this far because councillors have not been aware of the full situation. For example, it appears that St Jude's has withheld plans that confirm works on neighbours' land from the council, and the council has approved changes to the original development application using powers of delegated authority. We moved into what we thought was a quiet residential suburb, and now we have a huge commercial development happening literally in our backyards. So I ask you to consider, how would you feel if this was your home and your lives were being impacted this way? We believe it is not too late to just press pause on this development, to stop allowing decisions to be made under delegated authority, to stop issuing building permits and demolition approvals in incremental stages without considering the full impact of these decisions. Please.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. That's your 5 minutes. Are you nearly finished?
I am.
If you could wrap it up, please. Thank you.
Please stop to think of the risks and hazards that rushing construction works brings to both St Jude's residents and the families who live on the site. We are asking today just for it to be pressed pause so that councillors can be made of the full situation with all available information before any further decisions are made. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. If you could take a seat. The next speaker on this item is Ms. Ingrid Marr from Planning Solutions. On behalf of the applicant, speaking in support of the recommendation, you've received a written deputation, also councillors. So thank you, Ms. Marr. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you and good evening, Mayor and councillors and officers of the City. I'm Ingrid Marr, Senior Planner at Planning Solutions. I am here on the behalf of the applicant as a representative and also on behalf of the landowner to speak in support of the officer's recommendation for approval of agenda item 4.6. I thank the officers for their assessment and just wanted to clarify that the application being considered tonight and next week just relates to the northern boundary retaining wall and the fence of the St Jude's Aged Care Facility in Guildford. The development that the other presenter discussed is already approved and under construction, and as with this fence it will be subject to a building permit, so that's a separate approval that will be required before any site works could commence on the fence. So as you can appreciate, it is a very simple application, one that simply seeks to replace a dilapidated fence and retaining wall with a new one. In accordance with the officer's recommendations, we respectfully request that Council grant approval for the proposed amendment to approved development, and I'm just here to answer questions if you have any. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Marr. Any questions of Ms. Marr, councillors? Councillor Catalano, I'll hear your question. Thank you.
So I'd like to know from Ms. Marr, how are you going to be actually... we've heard that there's going to be works on neighbours' land. So can you please explain to me what that means to you when you hear that statement?
Yes, thank you for your question. I'm just here to talk about the application that's before us. I actually wasn't involved in the previous application. So my understanding, though, is that there's no works on adjoining properties that wouldn't be done without approval and consultation with the neighbours. So the previous application went through the consultation process with neighbours, and those submissions were considered. The development was subsequently approved. But yes, just simply, I would have to take that question on notice and get back to you. But my understanding is that would not be the case, that the development will be undertaken in accordance with its approvals and all the regulations and what have you. Yeah.
Councillor Coley.
Through you, Mayor, I'm interested to hear from Ms. Lewis the impact on her family and the personal situation which makes this whole development quite stressful for their family.
Okay. Have we got any more questions of Ms. Marr, councillors, while she's at the microphone? Councillor Richardson, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, through you. Just a quick question in regard to that replacement of that fence. The material of that fence being replaced is?
I'll have to get back to you. I haven't got the details in front of me. I don't think that was included in the application. But I understand it had a brick retaining, and then the upper portions. So I'll see if I've got it in front of me.
We've got a presentation on this staff section.
So there is public artwork that are going to go on the panels, but the panels themselves, sorry, I'm just trying to find, I'll have to get back to you on, sorry, the construction details, sorry.
Just a quick question. The previous speaker regarding the asbestos report not being given back to him from the builder, is there any asbestos linked to that particular fence?
Not that I'm aware, and I don't have that background. I haven't been involved in the other applications. So, in terms of the retaining wall, I'm not aware of any asbestos, the retaining and boundary fence that's being replaced. No.
Any further questions to Ms. Marr? Thank you, Ms. Marr. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Councillor Coley, you had a question in regards to because we're talking about a retaining wall and a fence of Miss Lewis. So we have. Bear in mind, Councillor, we are talking about a fence and technical report, so we're getting to the emotional stuff. So if you just want to, what's your question? A quick one.
Mayor, on many occasions you have raised personal and emotional reasons for in support of motions that you wanted to support. So I don't see anything wrong with me asking.
Councillor, settle down. I've asked Ms Lewis to answer your question.
Thank you.
So we won't have this constant aggressive attack in this chamber. So Ms Lewis, if you could just reiterate Councillor Kiley's question. Thank you.
Would you mind just repeating the question?
I'm interested in the family circumstances which makes this development all the more stressful for your family.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for the question. So we were first made aware by the architect at the initial community consultation meeting over 18 months ago of the intent to undertake works on our private land for this development. We have been living under the stress for 18 months of knowing that these works were going to happen. We received a letter in April of last year putting in writing that these works were going to happen on our land. And it has been an incredibly stressful process not to be able to live our lives as we would want to on our property. Since the building permit has been issued, finally we have had some further communications from the developer, which prior to that was simply the initial consultation meeting and the letter. We haven't had any other communications. And now there is an immense amount of pressure from the developer to meet with them and discuss their plans because they are already on site. Demolition is starting tomorrow. We have asked for the construction management plan because our house is about to be assessed to check that it will be suitable for home dialysis because my husband is in end-stage renal failure. They refuse to give us the construction management plan to give us any sort of indication of the time frame. They refuse to give us the asbestos management plan despite my daughter's cubby house being adjacent to the wall and despite her bedroom being about 5 metres from this building. We have been completely in the dark for 18 months and it has been an incredibly stressful situation that has meant we have had to fight for this information. We've had to fight for it and it has been taking a lot of our time when we have full-time jobs, we have a young child, and we needed to keep on top of my husband's health situation and we weren't able to. And now we find ourselves in a situation where we're going to be assessed for the suitability of our home, for home dialysis, and we are about to be living on a construction site.
Thank you, Ms Lewis. Councillor, remind you that the previous approvals are done with. The item here is about a retaining wall and a fence. So, Councillor Catalano, question?
Yes, thank you. Well, I wanted to know a bit more from Ms Lewis about how this application is going to impact on your private property. Like you say that there's going to be this thing where they go onto your private property.
Yes.
So I'd like to know a bit more about that from her.
So this relates to the retaining wall and the fence. Ms Lewis.
Well, as I said in my deputation, it relates to the retaining wall and the fence because once the approval is given, it will allow the builder to start excavation works on the northern site boundary. And once they start excavation works, it will place property owners in a very difficult position because once those site works begin, there are going to be few viable alternatives left apart from the ones that the developer has provided us with in the last few days that shows injection of grout into our property to stabilise the footings for the wall. That is just on our property. There are 3 other impacted properties on East Street who have different construction methodologies that involve destruction of alfresco areas, piling adjacent to bedrooms, and even shows temporary fencing through my neighbour's bedroom.
A further question?
To follow on from that, so is there... I find it hard that you haven't been able to just tell them that they can't go on the property and they can't encroach on the property?
Yes, we have not provided our consent for them to do that, but we understand that a court order can be served on us, which is obviously another aspect to the stress of this situation.
A court order from, in respect of?
The works proposed on our property, a court order can be served and the residents can be taken to a magistrate's court for the magistrate to decide whether the works can take place on our property.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Councillor Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you, I'd like to ask a question of Ms Lewis regarding a comment in the officer's report. So in option 2 of the officer's report, in refusal, the reason would be the proposed development will have an adverse visual impact on the abutting railway reserve, so detracting from the character of the Guildford locality. I'd like to ask Ms Lewis for her opinion on the current visual impact of that the boundary and the site and how this will affect it.
Okay. Do you understand that, Ms Lewis?
Yes, I think Councillor Scanlon's asking for my opinion on the visual
current fence
of the northern retaining wall.
The current retaining wall and fence at the back.
Sorry, excuse me, Mr Mayor, and also the effect the work would have on the visual amenity of the heritage of Guildford. So the works that are in the application.
And the difference the new fence would make. Okay.
And the site.
Well, I understand that in relation to the northern visual amenity, this was not assessed by the Heritage Council. They said, if I recall correctly, that it wasn't a main thoroughfare, although the northern boundary can be seen from the train and from the railway station. So it's actually a very visible heritage viewpoint from there. In terms of the wall itself, there are definitely some improvements that need to be made along that access road, and I'm not sure how this will impact upon that, whether it will be a positive or a negative. But in terms of the heritage aspect, I'm not sure whether this has been carefully assessed by the State Heritage Office.
Okay. Thank you, Ms Lewis. Further question?
Yes, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to ask if you could ask if it's possible for council to be provided with the materials of the new wall to be built by the council meeting next week.
Yep, you can ask Mr Russell after this if he can get it for you. Thank you, Ms Lewis.
Thank you.
You got a further question?
Thank you. I'm just curious as to the security fencing that they discussed or that the developer discussed with you that you were told about 18 months ago. Have they outlined what they're going to do to that security fencing, whether you'll have privacy in terms of children and pets, how that's going to affect your backyard and entertaining and your sense of living space? Proposed timeline.
Do you mean the temporary fencing or when the works are completed?
As they're being completed, will there be a temporary fence and the height and security of your children and your pets?
Yeah.
What have they allowed for that?
So they haven't mentioned anything about security at all for the properties where there's going to be temporary fencing.
How will that affect your children then in terms of security and also privacy from building the construction workers?
Yeah, they've just said it will be a mesh fence. And that's the only information we have at this time about the temporary fencing. As I mentioned, we are concerned about the location of where the temporary fencing will be placed. In some instances, it shows it intersecting bedrooms. I think this has occurred because the plans don't actually show the location of current structures on our homes. They haven't done a survey, so it's quite difficult to understand how a design can be developed without knowing where the existing structures are. So the temporary fencing on the current plans is shown in some instances to intersect bedrooms and such.
Thank you, Ms Lewis.
Thank you.
Okay, with no further questions, I'll move on to the next item, which is the intersection modification of New Bond and Morrison Road. First speaker is, so we have written, so we don't have any in person, we have a couple of written ones and a late submission while we wait for Councillor Johnson. That's all the deputations in Part B. So we move to the ones in Part C, which is C 1. Where's Councillor Johnson gone? It's proposed amendments to meeting procedures, local order of business or council meetings. We've gone a long way. And the first speaker is Ms Diane Arvino in support of the motion. She's written. Again, there's no in person. C 1.4 is a report on feasibility of achieving net zero CO2 emissions within 10 years. Number of written deputations have been received, and the first speaker will be Dr Jane Genovese from Transition Town, Guildford, in support of the motion. Thank you. Dr Genovese, you have 5 minutes.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, councillors and CEO. My name is Dr Jane Genovese and I'm speaking in support of this motion. I work in high schools across Western Australia, and every year I get the opportunity to speak to thousands of students. I share with them strategies to help them reach their full potential and be their best selves. I get a real glimpse into their world. In recent years, I've never seen so many young people so anxious and depressed. Young people are worried about their future. They're worried about the state of the planet. They can sense things are not heading in a good direction. Students say to me, "What's the point in doing anything when things are so bad? Why should I bother?" They don't see the point in studying. They don't see the point in setting goals for their future when their future looks so bleak and uncertain. I often hear adults say to these young people, "But you could be the one who comes up with a solution to climate change. You could fix it." I really don't think it's fair to burden young people with this massive problem. They did not create this mess. Previous generations did. So we need to begin immediately to turn this around and achieve net zero emissions as soon as possible. Scientists are telling us we are running out of time. The world is currently heading for a destructive 3.5 to 4 degrees Celsius temperature rise by the end of this century. 3.5 to 4 degrees Celsius temperature rise. Now, young people, they get it. They know what's at stake. We need to take action on their behalf. Now, when you declare a climate emergency, you need to put in place actions to address that emergency. You need to set an ambitious target to achieve net zero emissions. Many Australian councils are already doing this. They are leading action on climate change. In 2016, the organisation Beyond Zero Emissions reviewed 152 Australian councils and found 82% had emissions targets for their own operations and 18% also had community emissions targets. As far as I know, the City of Swan currently has no targets for reducing emissions, and we desperately need targets. Setting an ambitious target for achieving net zero emissions is really the morally right thing to do. Having no target or setting a far-off target like 2050 is shirking responsibility. It's not taking the action that climate scientists are saying we need to take. It's leaving the issue to future employees and councillors to deal with. We really don't have the luxury of time. We need to start transitioning straight away. The officer's comments suggest the focus is only on reducing council's internal and operational emissions. But we need to go much, much further than this. Council has to lead the way, but it has a responsibility to help the broader community, that is, residents and businesses, reach the same goal. We want better bike paths and bike share schemes. We want community climate events. We want urban forest strategies. And we want community-owned solar projects. Now, this is possible. To give you an example, in 2017, the Sunshine Coast Council became Australia's first local government to offset its entire electricity consumption across all its facilities and operations. They were able to do this from renewable energy that was generated at their Sunshine Coast solar farm. This solar farm will provide $22 million in savings after costs over a 30-year period. Like many people, the community really wants to be involved in this. Please consult with us. Let us be involved in the process of achieving net zero emissions. We want to reduce our emissions. The support is there. We want action on climate change. In times of crisis, we all need to work together. Now, like many people in our community, I felt scared and deeply saddened by the recent bushfires. The loss of homes and wildlife was devastating. Every morning I would check my email and I'd see an important message from Mayor Kevin Bailey. Mayor Bailey, it was really reassuring receiving your emails. Thank you for sending them. You did a remarkable job in keeping us informed about the bushfires and offering support to people in our community. We appreciate this very, very much. Your leadership made such a difference. Councillors, when it came to COVID, you listened to the medical scientists. You continued to listen to the medical scientists and do what needs to be done to protect our community. Now it's time to start listening to the climate scientists and implementing solutions to reduce our emissions. The climate crisis really demands that we put aside our personal and political differences and that we all work together. So please, let's just get on with this.
Thank you, Dr Genovese. The next speaker is Dr Peter Langlands in support of the motion. Thank you, Dr Langlands.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors, CEO. My question is, would any of you get on an aeroplane if you knew you only had a 67% chance of landing? Would you fly if you knew that 1 out of 3 times the plane was going to crash? I doubt it. I certainly wouldn't. But at the moment, this is a scenario that we as a species are currently taking in response to the climate emergency. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change set a carbon budget of 1,170 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide starting from January 2018. We have to stay within that carbon budget if we want to have a chance of staying below 2 degrees of warming and avoiding the worst impacts of global warming. But that budget only gives us a 67% chance of staying below 2 degrees. So from a risk management perspective, it's kind of insane. If an outcome has catastrophic impacts, as 2 degrees would, for example, 99% of all coral reefs will be lost at 2 degrees, and it could potentially trigger runaway climate change that creates a hothouse Earth, why would we only give ourselves a 2/3 chance of survival? Therefore, the IPCC targets are inherently conservative and completely inadequate. But if we put that aside for a moment and we divide that carbon budget amongst every person on Earth in an equitable way, it works out to approximately 150 tonnes per person. Australia's current per capita carbon footprint, one of the worst in the world, if not the worst, is at least 20 tonnes per year. So on that basis, our 150 tonnes individual carbon budgets would last 7.5 years. So the clock started ticking in 2018, and at the current rate, we, individually and collectively as Australia, will have used up our carbon budget by 2025. That's only to give us, as I said, 2/3 chance of avoiding that catastrophic 2 degrees. So for Australia to play its fair share and not disadvantage poor developing countries, the only logical and moral conclusion means we must achieve net zero by 2025. This calls for strong leadership. Like Jane said, the Mayor sent out excellent daily emails last week for the Wirraloo fires, and our Premier has given daily updates on the coronavirus outbreak. The only difference between those emergencies and the climate emergency is that impacts are not so obviously in our face. But as the Black Summer bushfires over East last year showed us, the impacts are already here and they are only going to get worse. But imagine how quickly things could change if we had weekly or daily updates on the climate and biodiversity emergencies. If we were reminded how much carbon stored in our native forests were being cleared weekly, or how much canopy cover was lost in the city in the last month, how much renewable energy had been provided, and how we could all reduce our energy use. If, just like having financial implications listed for every item that comes to Council, the carbon emission implications were also listed so that this could be taken into account and addressed or offset. Simply, if you don't have a target and set a date, you can't get there. Other councils in WA and over East have already gone carbon neutral. And looking over the last day for examples, I found that here in Western Australia, the company Austral Fisheries went carbon neutral in 2016. The New Zealand government has set a date of 2025 for its government operations to be carbon neutral. And even Meat and Livestock Australia has a target of 2030. Therefore, I strongly encourage the Council to show leadership, take this first step towards a net zero emissions target. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr Langlands. The next speaker is Mr David Blair in support of the motion. Thank you, Mr Blair. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, councillors and Mayor. My name's David Blair. I've lived in Guildford for 60 years. In 2020, I was lucky to win the Prime Minister's Prize for Science, and I've spent a lot of my scientific life studying, all of it studying physics and quite a lot studying climate change. Last year, after the prize announcement, I gave a talk on climate change and in particular how it might affect how Swan City could act in relation to it in Guildford, and also involved in creating a science curriculum for school students about climate change, that I spoke to science teachers about last December. I know that at least one of you here is a climate change sceptic, so I wanted to just say a couple of things about climate change. I want to ask if any of you have had a medical scan. Now, I imagine most of you have, most of us have. In the year of settlement, of a white settlement in Perth, the person who invented the mathematics that is inside the computers that let you image with an ultrasound or something explained why the Earth was warm enough because of the gases that helped to keep it warm. That was Fourier. And so even if you don't believe in climate change, you probably believe in medical scans because they help to diagnose cancer and see unborn babies and all the things that I know so fantastic. Well, both of these things are the truth, climate change and medical scans. And today we have infrared cameras that can see the CO2 in the atmosphere, which is black to infrared light. And we can see the atmosphere is getting thicker. We have satellites watching it, and we can see it getting worse and worse every year. There's absolutely no doubt that climate change is real and it's an emergency. It's not a conspiracy. It's science, and it's been proved time and time again. In fact, it was 1896 that the first calculation of the heating of the Earth was done by Arrhenius, and his calculations even then were pretty well spot on. He talked about 4 degrees of heating, and that is exactly what you just heard from the previous speakers. So, so what about this emergency and the city of Swan? We can say from the predictions that the city of Swan is going to go underwater. Most of the city will be underwater. We don't know exactly what year it's going to be because there's uncertainty in the predictions. But we are seeing the Antarctic melting. Our cold weather now is probably a result of the Antarctic melting. The world's getting hotter, and some of the cooling is coming from Antarctica. So the situation is, as Peter and Jane said, that everybody in the world has got to act on this. Nobody can say, oh, we're just a small part, we don't have to worry. We all have got to take responsibility for it, just like we all have to take responsibility for COVID. You can't just have a few people ignoring it. We all have to take responsibility. And all over the world, really everywhere, there are meetings taking place just like this one, where people are talking about about climate change and taking action. As you heard from the previous speakers, lots of local authorities all over Australia are already taking action. So it's critically important that we take our responsibility here. And I completely agree with what Jane said, that young people need to see that we are taking action.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. That is your 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Councillors, got any questions to the speakers? Councillor McNamara. Which speaker?
Dr. Jane Genovis. Dr. Genovis, you mentioned in your speech that you were concerned about the children, and you mentioned the children a lot from the point of view of their concerns with regard to the future, and their concerns and their worries. Surely it's adults are actually telling the children and giving them the worries from the point of view. I'm just asking you the question, right? And also, is it not true that the curriculum that is given to children nowadays is also looking at gender identity from the point of view of telling children they have to decide from 6 years of age up.
Mr. Mayor, point of order, please.
Councillor McNamara, I think that particular
It's
part
exactly
of your
what I'm
question
saying, Mr.
is irrelevant, so we need to stick to the subject at hand.
The subject at hand.
Thank you, Mayor.
I'm going to finish. I am finished my questions, but the subject at hand was the children, and that was the main point of the speaker.
Can I just make sure I've understood the question, the first question? So, Councillor McNamara, you're saying are us adults making these young people, I work with teenagers, are we making them unnecessarily worried about this? Is that my question? Is that question? Is that the question?
I think that's what Councillor McNamara implied. Yes.
Firstly, I think that question in itself makes me feel really worried that you're, and that's the kind of question, like Scott Morrison said, when the school climate strikers striked, thousands of young people striked in Australia. He said something similar. He said, let kids be kids. In other words, we know better than you. These young people have access to the internet. They're not stupid. The climate science is so clear and compelling, and it's frustrating for them when adults don't take it seriously. So that's part of the problem here. Adults don't seem to get it. The young people get it more than a lot of their parents do and their grandparents.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
We get the answer there. I think you've got your answer, Councillor. Yep, thank you. Any further questions of Dr. Genovese while she's at the microphone?
I've got one, actually, if Dr. Genovese could take the microphone again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick one. You've said let us, the community, be involved in the process. What would that look like?
So Peter and I are from Transition Town, Guildford, and we'd just like to be brought along the journey. At the moment, we get notifications about a tree's being cut down, just things like that, burst water pipe, but we want to be really involved, and we're connected to a lot of people in our community who care about this issue. We want to be at community consultations. And if you look at what the City of Ballarat are doing, they've set an ambitious target of net zero emissions by 2025. They are bringing the community along with them in a number of initiatives. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but they're doing a lot of community forums and just involving them every step of the way. Because like we said before, everyone's in this together. And the great thing is 70% of Australians want action on climate change. The community will be with you on this one.
Can I just ask one more question through you, Mr. Mayor? Just this motion, I guess, in essence, is seeking a report to council. Do you think that's an important first step? What's your response to that?
So the report to council on what an ambitious target would look like and an action plan for achieving that ambitious target. Is that involved in the report? Is that?
I think Councillor Johnson would answer that.
So, Councillor Johnson, do you want?
Yeah, the report could include a recommendation to engage with the community, which is what I would expect it to include. Yep. So it covers a plan. It would cover every step of the way to get to the goal.
I think this report is a great first step, and we need to do it urgently. I know the Sustainability Office here, they need more support, and bringing in more expert advice is never a bad thing. So I think this report would be worthwhile.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Scanlon of Dr. Genovese.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At least I believe it's for Dr. Genovese.
Well, how about you ask me and I'll see what we can do.
Okay. There was a comment made in the deputations that we should reach a target of zero emissions by 2025. This motion by Councillor Johnson is to reach zero emissions within 10 years. Why is 10 years not adequate? I'm sorry, it may have been Dr. Langlands who made that comment, sorry. So, why is 10 years not adequate and why should it be by 2025?
I think Peter should answer that question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Langlands.
Yeah, I think that was in my deputation, Councillor Scanlon. So what I was talking about was the IPCC, like how much carbon we can burn, to only give us 2/3 chance to stay under 2 degrees. And if you divide that equitably above, by the human population, our fair share would be used up by 2025, that it only lasts 7.5 years starting from 2018. So that's why I was saying 2025. Other analyses I've seen, people are talking about, definitely by 2030, like globally, we probably need to be net zero emissions, not 2050. That's just crazy, because I didn't even go into, in terms of 2 degrees, a lot of scientists are saying that's not safe. We're only at 1.1 degree and we're already starting to see the impacts. Tipping points have already been triggered in terms of the Arctic sea ice, coral reefs, West Antarctic glaciers. So every point of a degree matters, and all the Pacific Islands want 1.5 degree. Their whole countries depend on staying at 1.5 degrees. So everything is conservative. We need to be doing better than basically everything that we're saying.
Thank you. Further question, Councillor Scanlon?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Dr. Langlands. If it's 10 years, do you know the estimated temperature rise? Sorry, if we proceed as we are, what is going to be the estimated temperature increase in 10 years?
Not off the top of my head, sorry. I'd have to look that up, yeah.
Do you know a ballpark figure for 5 years, what it would be, or what rate we're increasing, or maybe Dr. Blair knows?
I know something I was preparing for this, that the rate of increase has increased in the last 5 years. And when you look at the rate of increase, and one of the scary things is, 93% of all the heat that we've added to the planet has so far gone into the oceans, but the rate that the oceans are absorbing heat is decreasing, and that could then reverse. So we're suddenly going to get a rate of increase even more. It's extremely complicated. One of our friends did his PhD on aerosols, and if you look at coal, it actually creates sulfur, so it reduces heating. So as we stop burning coal, we're going, like currently the coal we're burning is stopping about 0.5 of a degree of warming. So if we cut out all coal and reduce fossil fuel use, which we need to, we're going to get a sudden spike in temperature because we're removing those aerosols. So actually, as I was saying, just the more you look into it, basically, the worse it gets. All the science that is coming out continually is always on the worst side. If you think, maybe it's going to get better, it's not. It's always worst-case scenarios.
Thank you, Dr. Langlands. I think you covered your question. Right.
May I ask
Another
one more question of Dr. Blair, please? My question is to, through you to Dr. Blair, how will this temperature increase affect the residents of the city of Swan?
We can say pretty well for certain that the sea level is going to be rising and rising, and 10 metres of sea level rise is not unlikely, but the exact timing for that would be very hard for me or anybody to say. Is it going to be at when your grandchildren are your age, or maybe your great-grandchildren? But we can say that this is going to happen. All of these things that have we're always looking at these graphs that show the range of uncertainties. What's the fastest and what is the slowest? But just in last year, they doubled the rate of sea level rise from the original predictions, and that's because of the much faster rise in the melting in the Antarctic, this carving of huge glaciers, of huge icebergs that you might have seen in the news.
Okay, so I think, Mr. Blair, the question was, how is that going to affect the City of Swan?
Well, and so it's sea level rise. A sea level rise is going to drown the City of Swan. The coast is going to be up near Walyunga National Park and along Swanview. This place will be underwater. My house will be underwater. But I can't say exactly what year. But that is only one of the things, and that is more looking to the longer term. And in the short term, what we're going to see is much more heat waves. The fires like we've just seen are we've only had, as you just heard, 1.1 degrees. By 2030, we're going to have more like 2 degrees. And the fires are going to get worse. These fires only burnt, I think, 12,000 hectares. The fires over east last year burnt millions of hectares. So we'll get that in Western Australia as well.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. Any further questions? Last one, Councillor Scanlon. I think we'll let someone else have a crack.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do appreciate that. I'd just like to ask you, if the City of Swan adopts a target to reduce our emissions to net zero by a certain time, will that assist the City of Swan residents directly in mitigating these risks?
We all have to make our contributions. So if there'll be several ways that it will help City of Swan, and one is it will help other people as well, because everybody will join with it, and people won't be branded as being in this outlier place that is refusing to contribute. But Jane mentioned urban forests. We need that because we need far more trees. That will make the amenity value here much better. So we should have all our car parks with solar panels over the top generating electricity. We'll have shady car parks then, much nicer, and we'll know that all that energy, instead of heating the city, is acting to generate electricity which stops the burning of coal. So,
thank you, Mr. Blair. We got away from the question. Councillor Richards, you got a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Thank you, Dr. Blair. In April last year, in 2020, Councillor Catalano, Councillor Johnston, Scanlon, and myself attended the climate conference in Melbourne. In response to attending that, was quite a professional and as well as a public member, who come back to council and report on what we were learning about this, that we could then educate our constituents, and it was quite an eye-opener because you need to be able to...
Your question, Councillor?
Getting to the question. So, in terms of being able to educate the public, if you were in charge of the City of Swan implementing this process by 2025, what would the 2 dates, key years be for you to implement the change within the City of Swan and for the City of Swan community?
Well, the first thing is the audit that's been proposed. That should be done as soon as possible. There should be no delays on that process at all. The process of giving information out should be also with no delays at all. We should know what our contributions are, what the City of Swan is doing in terms of reducing its emissions, and we should be involved in the process. As Jane said, so clearly, it's involving the community, for the community to come with you. There are people out there who all want to do something and they feel powerless because they don't have the leadership. So, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to ask you for your leadership on this.
The other part of your question was what year specifically? Implemented. You've got a couple of years you can rattle off.
It's It's so, I think, 2025, but we certainly we shouldn't be talking about things like 2050. It's this next decade that we have got to win this battle.
Okay, so
2025 for the City of Swan to become...
Well,
is that possible, Dr. Blair?
It's the art of the possible, and I don't want to ask you guys to do the impossible. I'm not sure what's possible. That's why you need these audits and things like that to work out what's possible.
Okay.
Well, we have seen it is possible within other states, and that was highlighted at the conference.
Okay, have you got a further question?
What would that second total be for the broad range of community, 2000 and...
Yeah. So, I'd
Mr.
say...
Blair, I appreciate that's probably a very hard question to answer.
What's most important is that not only the council be acting on its own behalf, but you be influencing things like our huge shopping centres so that they are all generating power and not just generating CO2, which they are. They've got huge areas of roofs that should be covered in solar panels. We should have a solar power station as fast as we could do it for the City of Swan, to make the City of Swan being a net carbon negative instead of carbon positive, as we are now.
Thank you.
Councillor
Johnson, you've been patiently waiting. I've seen your hands up half a dozen times.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for noticing me. My question has been answered when Dr. Blair told us he thought 2025 was a good target. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. I'm mindful of time. Councillor Parry, you're the very last question on this. Who's your question to?
I've got a question for the doctor. In your point, we all need to do our part. If climate change is the largest moral dilemma that we have in the world today, in order to reduce carbon emissions in the City of Swan, would you be willing to support to build nuclear power plants in the City of Swan?
Would I?
Would you be willing to support to build nuclear power plants in the City of Swan?
I think if you do the economics of it, the economics will say solar is so much better.
So from a climate change perspective, if it reduces it, would you support it? That's the question.
Well, there are too many implications. You talk solar, a nuclear power station is something which is really a national thing, and what I would say is a country that generates 80% of its power with nuclear, which is France, can't really be criticised for doing it. So I wouldn't take any particularly strong nuclear, anti-nuclear stance on this. But the economics in favour of solar has just gone so far that everything else looks ridiculous.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. You're free to go. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay, councillors, we've got a couple of reports for officers to give us a brief on and a quick comment on. So first one is 4.4, is the RAR for the proposed educational establishment in Harper Street. Mr. Russell. Followed by the proposed clubhouse on West Swan Road and the boundary fence at St Jude's. So, Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, the report's there. I'm happy to take questions of the councillors.
Councillors, any questions firstly on 4.4 of Mr. Russell? No? 4.4?
Yes, sorry, I'd written down 4.2. So my question for 4.2 is there a time frame available to...
4.4 we're talking about, are you?
So for the RAR for the...
Yeah, RAR is
school
4.4.
Yeah. So is there a time frame available for staff to ask for the traffic study to be done in time to get the RAR in?
No, Mr. Mayor.
When's it due to JDAP?
It's due to JDAP shortly after the council meeting. What I would say on that, the city did ask in good order that the applicant's traffic impact assessment project traffic volumes to 2031. I'm led to believe it wasn't a question of the time frame to do that, but that they didn't believe it was required because they thought that the proposal to utilise the Crosby Street car park might address the reasons for us asking for that information.
Thank you.
It's going to JDAP on the 19th, Councillor. Any further questions of Mr Russell on 4.4 or 4.5? Okay, Councillor Henderson, I think you were first.
Thank you, Mayor. On 4.5. Mr Russell, the Bush Forever Site 200 on the area that the club wants to operate, it's my understanding that that site actually encompasses all the way across to Isidore Street along Harrow. Is that your understanding?
Through Mr Mayor, I believe so. It's my understanding, yes.
So, given that and the potential impact of dieback and the like that was discussed this evening, and the amount of traffic that was being proposed, do we see any potential for, if you like, slippage or potential impact on the site to the west of the proposed road?
So whether or not if I understand the question correctly, Mr Mayor, whether or not the traffic in and out of West Swan Road into the site might transport material that might infect the balance of the site to the west. I'm not in a position to answer that.
Okay, it's a bit of a difficult one to answer, I accept, Mr Mayor. The other issue concerns me that I didn't get a good answer in terms of a big event where a lot of cars were there, and my concern was that it may in fact spill across both sites. So the next question in regard to the Bush Forever site, are you aware if there's any proposals to remove the Bush Forever site to the west of the Henley-Brook Avenue?
Through Mr Mayor, no. What the application has clearly sought is to utilise about a 4,000 square metre area, which you can see on the plans, that is clear at the moment, and that's all they're proposing. So they did address, you did hear this evening from the gentleman, the address of the issue around how much parking they might require, and they seem to have indicated, well look, we'll use the parking on the cleared racetrack area. There's no trees on that to my understanding. They have indicated subsequently, I think, that they might be able to provide an asset protection zone around the building. But I think the question around that, and you can see in the recommendation that staff are making to council to make to the commission is, this is a Bush Forever site, and you shouldn't be clearing bush. So if that's the first and foremost priority of the designation of the land, then there should be no clearing. So if the proponent is now saying to address fire that they might look at having an asset protection zone around their building, then I would suggest that they would need to do so, site the building in an area where the asset protection zone's already taken care of and there's no vegetation they'll need to clear. Otherwise, if you're clearing vegetation, you are to some degree impacting the Bush Forever designation. That's unequivocal.
So, final question. It may not be Mr Russell, but maybe more broadly to the CEO or staff. So that Bush Forever site is partially encompassed by the club. Google Maps shows that the Bush Forever Part 200 of that site to the west of proposed Henley-Brook Avenue doesn't exist anymore. Now, I'm asking staff are aware of any proposals to remove that Bush Forever site to another area in an offset or whatever.
Mr Russell, are you aware of
that? Through Mr Mayor, no, I'm not.
Mr Van Lee's shaking his head not. So, Councillor McNamara, you are next.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Russell, page 164 is your recommendation. And it says the West Planning Commission advise the Western Australia Planning Commission that, based on the information available, it cannot support the development, etc., etc. And the last word is unless. Right? Unless. Now, unless 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 things happen. Now, Mr. Eyre has categorically said tonight that he is prepared to sit down with the staff and work out any problems that they may have with this situation. So this unless, if the question is, if this unless is satisfied by Mr. Eyre, does that sort out the opposition to it, if you want to You want a word?
Through
Russell?
Mr Mayor, if you mean the opposition of the staff in forming the recommendation,
I
or
don't mean the opposition in general. I'm talking about the actual recommendation, not the opposition from anybody that wants to oppose the public or whatever.
I think what you're saying is if conditions 1 through 8 were satisfied,
Yes.
would that satisfy approval?
Well,
I think.
unless all these things happen.
Yeah, that's right. So I think that's the question, Mr. Russell.
self-evidently, yes, Mr Mayor. If you tick
That
the
was
boxes in terms of the issues raised satisfactorily, then you have a recommendation, or at least the staff would be prepared to recommend to Council that the issues raised, as we see it, have been addressed and that the Council might recommend to the Commission approval, yes.
My last question is, will the Ward Councillors recommend a retention or nothing this on the head for a couple of weeks until it's sat down and then goes?
You'll talk to them about that.
Mr Mayor, I intend
To move an alternate?
moving option 2.
Okay.
No, I intend to second it.
Right. That's your intention. Councillor Johnson, you are next.
My questions have been answered, Mr Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Kylie, you got one on 4.5.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, I'm interested. First of all, this is the RAR report in its full form, I would imagine. The report.
Through Mr Mayor, this is not a RAR report to the JDAP. This is a recommendation to the West Australian Planning Commission.
And would the whole report go to the Western Australian Planning Commission, or just a letter containing the Council's decision?
Through Mr Mayor, frequently when we send the resolution, which is the official minuted decision of the Council, we often attach the report, but the Commission staff and the Commission themselves can readily see on the public record the report that's gone to Council that the staff have prepared, if they wish so. But in essence, we generally do, but it's readily available, it's free and accessible.
My concern through you, Mayor, is that while option 2 may be moved by Councillor Zanino and seconded by Councillor Henderson, I intend to support option 2. However, I'm concerned that we include in the conclusion the third paragraph and a separate officer recommendation, and we've also got on page 164 another recommendation. I'm just concerned that we're not being heard as a council if this whole document goes to the WAPC in its current form, because it seems to be heavily weighted in favour of the officer's decision rather than the council. So I'm just wondering if we can... Is it possible to only put forward the council's decision if option 2 does get up, rather than submit the whole report, which recommends a whole lot of other provisional conditions of approval?
Would it be? I don't know, Mr. Russell had an answer. I thought you were just giving the council's decision with the reasons for.
Well, Mr Mayor, this is already on the public record. You can't expunge what someone seeking to look at the public agenda. If there's an officer at the department, for instance, Mr Hilliard, is wanting to see what the disposition is of the staff and the assessment of the application that the council's making a recommendation on, he's already seen it. So if Councillor Kiley's concern is that somehow the report, which it needs to do to you to present all the issues and provide a response to those, may somehow entice or empower the Commission to make a decision contrary to the Council's recommendation, I have to say that that's been going on for years in the nature of the public reports that are on the public agenda for you. So,
Given they are the landowner, I would suggest they already know what's in the report.
I take on Mr Russell's comment there that this has been going on for years, but my concern is that we are 15 elected councillors and we seem to be have our opinions diluted through the process of State Administrative Tribunal and the JDAP process, and we often get respondents in here, applicants in this chamber, saying that I note the officer's report is to do such and such, but I just want to remind councillors that we are the 15 elected councillors, and it's us that are democratically elected.
Thank you, Councillor Asher. Question time.
Democratically elected, and I think we should be heard rather than the officers, moreover, than ourselves.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions of Mr Russell? Yeah, this one. Yeah. can you wish, or if you've got no more questions, this I can move on to 4.6. Well, come on.
Question, Mr. Mayor. If it's 4.6, which I've got a proximity interest, do I need to leave at this point?
Yeah, I think you should if there's going to be questions. Thank you, Councillor. Don't go as far as last time. We were going to send out a search party. She doesn't have to leave for impartiality. No, she doesn't. No.
Okay. I just wanted to clear up this issue about works on neighbours' land. I find it very hard to understand how we're giving approvals if we give an approval, if we don't. But if we do give an approval, why the implications are that the proponents then can go onto neighbours' land and start messing around with neighbours' land for their development.
Mr. Russell?
Through Mr. Mayor. The first thing I'll say is I think we need to be very careful that we don't erroneously conflate the facts of this application with the issues that Ms. Lewis has raised. But I'll speak to the issues such as she's raised them. The issues that she has raised is in relation to the boundary interface to the eastern side of the site. This application is for the western side. Now, I understand Mrs. Lewis's contentions to you as this, Mr. Mayor. She is afraid that permitting this application will somehow permit or facilitate the applicants proceeding to enact the approval that they already have from this council to do earthworks across the site, that she then fears that the proponents will say to a magistrate, we've already done all this work and it's too late to change now, and we can't change the proposal or can't find a different means to address the boundary interface with their property. And that she fears, therefore, that it will put pressure on them and might prejudice their capacity in a court, a magistrate's court. And I would suggest, unless she's got a legal opinion to that effect from lawyers that have said if this goes ahead, it will fare ill for you in a magistrate's court, and I can't see how she can conflate the fears of that happening with this application. I'll say another thing, Mr. Mayor. The senior staff of this organisation, from building through to planning, and others I might add, can very clearly see that there are multiple options for St Jude's to deal with the position on their application if the neighbours, including Ms Lewis, do not accede to allow St Jude's access to use their land to construct the wall. They have absolutely other alternatives. I drafted one off on the back of an envelope this morning with Mr Vanderlinde. So I can understand the concerns, but it is a fact. St Jude's will need a court order. And like anything, and this is a magistrate's court, and that of course is appealable, you'll need a court order to allow St Jude's to go onto the land of Miss Lewis or other neighbours against their will. That's basic common law we're talking about, going back centuries. So I don't fear that that scenario that Miss Lewis has painted touches in any way materially on this application, which is a replacement for an existing brick retaining wall abutting the PTA rail reserve that is the same material and roughly the same height is visible from the exterior to the site, which is going down a little bit lower. They can put that in, they can start excavating. But once they get to the boundary with Miss Lewis's property and other neighbours, they won't be able to implement the retaining wall option if it's requiring them to access across the neighbours' properties without their consent. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Carolan's got a further
Another question following on from that. So I'll get you not to conflate the two issues, that's fine. But the question is, if this approval is given and the proponent does do the excavation across the site, as you said, and then they go to a court and they go, we've done all this work, then it's still a chance that the magistrate may give that order for the proponent then to go on the property. So there is still that risk that even though this is a completely different proposal to the one she's talking about, which is, I gather, from the back of her property, that because they're doing the works and they're doing the excavations, there is that risk that she's going to end up with a proponent on her property.
Well, only if the court grants such an order, but that risk would exist right now even without this, I would suggest.
That you would say it exists without this, but if
Yes.
this proposal goes through, it exists as well, and perhaps even more.
It exists now.
Yeah, but it'd be enhanced. That risk would be enhanced further.
I wouldn't say so, Mr Mayor, no.
So why wouldn't you say so?
They've already got an approval.
Yeah.
They've already got an approval for the facility and the retaining wall to the boundary with the neighbours
I understand
at that level.
that, yeah.
Okay? The worst case scenario, if someone said to me, does it mean it's inevitable that a magistrate would have to allow St Jude's access to the neighbour's property to build this? I would say no, because they could very clearly eliminate the digging down in the site and leave the level as it is, slightly raise the height of the buildings through a modification and build the facility without any need of retaining. There are multiple options anywhere along this train of events that St Jude's can address this issue if they wish. And I would imagine a magistrate would be cognisant of that and would certainly hear evidence to that effect from the neighbours through any law that they engage, that is possible to be done. So I don't look at this application and think it materially gives rise to enhanced risk that Ms Lewis has articulated to you. No, I don't. I believe so, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Coley, you're next.
Through you, Mayor. Mr Russell, would it be proper and orderly that we only permitted this work to go ahead if the dilapidation reports were done on the nearby properties, given that there would be excavators going on to close proximity to existing houses? Wouldn't we have to have the dilapidation reports, or is that not a condition of the approval?
Through Mr Mayor, it's not a condition of the approval. As I understand this situation, although I must say around the matter of St Jude's and the neighbours, I've never seen anything more fluid and potentially various matters being raised and contentions being made that have been denied one side or the other. I've rarely seen that, Mr Mayor.
Can I just get to the point? Have the dilapidation reports been done or not?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll get to the point. I understand, Mr Mayor, that there is discussions already, or the matter of St Jude's and the neighbours having a baseline assessment for the condition of the neighbour's property is something I believe that St Jude's builders were looking at doing with the input and the consent of the neighbours. So, Mr Mayor, that is a matter, as you would reasonably expect, that occurs every day of the week in this state and other places around Australia, where you have neighbours and another site that's building. The natural relationship is you need to check to see the condition of houses that exist pre-construction to determine who's at fault or likely at fault if there is any damage post-construction. So it happens all the time, and it's something that's generally dealt with privately between a neighbour and someone who is building. The neighbours can pay a condition survey themselves, and then they've got a baseline. If something happens, they can take it off and claim damages on the basis they're saying that the place was fine, it was inspected before construction work started, these things happened, and they might have a causative evidence. So that's already happening. It's not necessarily something, it's not a condition of the approval of what Council's already approved, and we can't retrospectively add it, Mr Mayor. But I think for Councillor Kiley's benefit, we can rest assured the neighbours are aware of that. I believe St Jude's are aware of that too, and they're working together on that front.
Through you, Mayor, I'll be moving an amended motion to approve the works upon the dilapidation reports being completed.
Councillor Podolny, you had a question?
Actually, no, I'll leave it. Thank you.
Councillor Richardson.
Question for you, Mr Mayor. What's the status of the asbestos report? Has the builder done the report? Are they holding it from the residents? Do they need to get a copy? Is it council?
I don't know, Mr Mayor. I can't answer that.
Is it essential to the Act?
essential to this digger? No, I wouldn't think so.
Not for this. Mr Vanlin, you had your hand up there for a second.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In relation to the asbestos management report, it wouldn't impact this development application at all, but I know the question has been asked earlier today around that aspect with regards to the rest of the development, and I can confirm that I've spoken to the architects, and they've confirmed that the asbestos management plan is a requirement under the Occupational Health and Safety legislation, which the city does not have oversight of. The city normally just gets involved in this aspect if we receive complaints during the removal process. The city does not hold a copy of such a management plan, and my understanding is that the developer is not obliged to provide a copy to the neighbours. They have also confirmed today that the asbestos management report have been completed. It is in place, and that the contractor removing the asbestos will have an unrestricted removal licence. The asbestos will be wrapped on site in accordance with the Code of Practice for the safe removal of asbestos and disposed off-site. The builder will hose down the site during removal as required under the above codes, and once the asbestos is removed, the site will be inspected and certified as clean. So according to the developer, they've got everything in place.
Thank you, Mr Vanlin. Other further questions of Mr Russell? Councillor Catalano.
I wanted to move on to another item, or if we're ready to move on.
Mr Russell, I will run through the rest later on if they're not here, but we'll deal with these ones for starters. So any further on these ones, councillors? Councillor Henderson?
4.3, if I may.
Okay, we'll just get these ones out of the way and we'll go. So what? Yeah, go and get it. Yep. We'll just get these ones out of the way, councillor. We've got presentation with them. We'll run through the list.
Can I just say that 4.3 was the one that I want to ask questions on as well?
Yeah, no, we'll get to it.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Phil?
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Okay, the next one is the intersection of New Bond Street and Morrison Road, and that would be Mr Coaten.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a number of reports on the agenda, but the only one that I draw Council's attention to where there's been deputations is item 5.2, New Bond Street. So there weren't any verbal deputations tonight, but there were two written deputations. So one was in objection, and the other one was actually a late submission that didn't make it in time for the council report. So it's been circulated just as a deputation, and that was in support of it. And late today we became aware of another late submission, so that'll be circulated. There wasn't time to circulate it this afternoon, but that was another late submission in objecting to the proposal. So essentially Grandstand Way, as part of the new junctions, is on the proposed to be constructed next financial year in 21-22, and the detailed design of that has identified that the best solution at the intersection is to convert the New Bond Street to a left-in, left-out arrangements at Morrison Road. So the alignment of the roads results in a staggered T, which is undesirable from a traffic safety perspective. So essentially there's numerous points of conflict between vehicles. So at New Bond and Morrison at the moment is left in, left out, right in, right out, and also straight through on Morrison Road, which is a dual lane, dual carriageway. So, and then that is with the staggered T, those conflict points are multiplied by 2 because there's two intersections like that close together. So from a traffic safety point of view, it is undesirable. So there's a range of other solutions that were looked at. Traffic signals was one, that they would be too close to the existing signals at Great Northern Highway, Morrison and Keene. And it is very unlikely also that main roads would approve traffic signals as well, because they're only approving them as a last resort. A roundabout at that location would have quite large land requirements. So it would mean impacting on adjoining properties. There'd be some significant service relocations required. It would be quite an expensive project, as Morrison Road is a dual carriageway through there. And it is also that, again, with a roundabout that is close to the Great Northern Keane-Morrison intersection and would lead to queuing issues and further traffic delays and congestion in that area. So he sent out 210 letters to properties in the area, properties that would use that intersection. We received 3 objections and 1 letter of support as part of that, or if you include the late submissions, it was 4 objections and 2 people supporting it. So in summary, some people certainly will be have to travel a bit further with following on from this work in some cases, but the roads in the area can handle that slightly increased traffic volume. So considering safety, costs and the overall traffic congestion in the area, staff believe that the safest, most efficient and cheapest solution is to make New Bond Street left in, left out.
Any questions, Councillor Podolny?
Thank you. I've got a few questions for you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Croton. Obviously, this relates to the Midland Oval redevelopment. Are we able to get a date on when we're going to get a briefing on the Midland Oval redevelopment as a council?
That would be Mr. Van Lin's question.
Does anyone else know?
Well, Mr. Van Lin will be able to give you something.
Mr. Mayor, on the briefing on Midland Oval, we are briefing the CEO to get him on board with what is happening on Midland Oval in the next week, and then after that is when we will determine a time period in which we need to prepare the briefing. But it would be late March or beginning April.
Thank you, Mr. Van Lin. You got a question to Mr. Coaten?
I do, Mr. Coaten. Through you, Mr. Mayor. How much will the road cost, and where are those funds coming from?
In the financial implications, it's $2,825,000, and that's in the 2021-22 draft budget.
My final question. There seems to be some challenges caused by this road, including the need for a safety audit. Why are we taking the approach of endorsing now and then looking at issues in more detail later? Can you please explain that approach?
That's not uncommon. Obviously, there's roadworks and development occurring all the time. So, yeah, that is that's not uncommon to do that. You can't just stop everything and do audits and things like that all over the place. There's a range of traffic issues occurring over the city all the time, so this approach isn't unusual.
Okay, can I just advise through you, Mr. Mayor, that I'll be withdrawing this one for debate next week?
Councillor Callanan.
Yes, thank you. When was the last, proper traffic study done for Morrison Road, taking into account the intent, the increased development that's going to be taking place on that new junction, the new junction site, and the impacts that that's going to have on, the traffic in the rest of Midland, but particularly on that area in North Midland? When was the last time a comprehensive traffic study was done on that?
I'd have to take that on notice and get the information to you unless Mr. Van der Linde knows off the top of his head.
I think the other thing is, because I've sort of done a little bit of research and I can't find one. And the other thing is, so I can't quite understand why we've got in the report that there's definite certainty that this has to be constructed in this way if we don't actually have the projected traffic volumes that Morrison Road, and a lot of people in here made submissions to the effect that basically it's just going to move the traffic up into those residential streets and we're going to end up with a rat run. So, we don't have that. I wanted to know, why can't we get a traffic study done to actually make some confidence, so that we've got some confidence that the statements that are in this about the necessity of this having to be done in this way, that we can be confident that this is the correct approach, given that we don't actually have that groundwork with traffic volumes, projected traffic volumes.
Well, traffic volumes on New Bond Street on the at 492.
No, I mean
so it's
projected traffic
so-
volumes, Jim, into the future when
Can
this
we
becomes
let Mr.
high
Coates
density.
answer the question? Give him half a chance.
Not, I was not talking about current traffic volumes. I was talking about the projected traffic
I think
volumes.
Mr. Coates tried to answer the question.
Yeah, on New Bond Street, traffic volumes are very low. They're 492. So if you take the view that half of those vehicles are going to move elsewhere, that's going to be 250 extra vehicles that are going in other directions vehicle trips that are going in other directions as a result of this closure. So, which is a comparatively small fraction, and the area along New Bond Street is unlikely to develop to generate greater traffic volumes in the future.
But am I correct that this is based on traffic that exists now because someone's gone down there and counted it or whatever, but it's not based on projected traffic that's going to take place after all this development's gone in, let's say in the next 10 years? And the reason why I say that is because without those traffic projections,
Councillor, I
isn't
think
the
you're
case...
getting to debate with Mr. Coates, but I think...
No, I'm just trying to...
Hang on. Mr. Vanderlin's got an answer there for you. He's raised his hand there.
Mr. Mayor, through you, when the city prepared its transport strategy, if I remember correctly, it was either 2012 or 2013, there was traffic modelling done broadly on all the major roads, which would have included Morrison Road. Subsequent to that, there was modelling done on specific roads in Midland, which I think Morrison Road perhaps wasn't included. But then when the design of Midland Oval itself was done, there was a further traffic study done by Cardno that informed the design of Midland Oval itself, which would have been around just after 2013. So that baseline information was incorporated into the design of the Midland Oval precinct.
Final question then. Is it sufficient to rely on a traffic study that was done in 2013 or 14 to be making decisions about how the traffic flows now for the next 10 or 20 years for when Midland is going to be transformed? Is it sufficient to rely on 2013 report? Because I'm concerned we're going to end up with what we've got down in Clayton Street if we don't actually get our traffic study done.
Can we get the question answered? Thank you.
The traffic counts were actually done in 2017. So Mr. Van der Linde was talking about a traffic study as opposed to the traffic counts. And irrespective of what any modelling shows, the city's still going to be left with those same options. The traffic signals, which main roads are unlikely to approve, a roundabout, which is going to be very costly and cause a lot of disruption in the area and would be difficult to get it to work, leaving it as a staggered T, which would be very safe, or the recommendation of staff is the left in, left out. So irrespective if there's additional modelling done, those options are still going to be the same.
Councillor Kyle, you got a question?
Yes, thank you. Talking about traffic studies and the structure plan, Jim, through you, Mayor, my original understanding is Grandstand Way would be junctioning through Morrison Road there, so it did abut with New Bond Street. And you're confirming that, Jim. But now we have a situation where there's no actual requirement for it to abut or be opposite New Bond Street. Given that, why can't we move... I mean, I like squaring up things. Why can't we move the intersection of the Grandstand Way further away, further to the east, away from New Bond Street, and so we have an opportunity to square up the park and get a bigger area of open space? I intend to be arguing against going ahead with this now. I think we should be doing another structure plan for the area, so we end up with a bigger public open space, because at the moment it's just not big enough. We're not getting the usage, and I don't see that we'll be getting the usage of that area as public open space into the future unless we look at another structure plan where this street, Grandstand Way, runs in a more north-south direction rather than trying to join up with New Bond Street, which you're telling me it's not going to abut now. So the question is, would we have to do a new structure plan for that area to change the intersection?
The design that staff have undertaken for Grandstand Way is in accordance with the master plan that was adopted by council.
We would have to do a new structure plan if we wanted to change it.
Well, yes,
Thank you.
The council have adopted this master plan. That's what the detailed design is being prepared on.
Councillor Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to Mr Croton. On the Midland Oval Redevelopment Master Plan in the report, the design doesn't actually include New Bond Street at all. Why is New Bond Street not... I can't see it on this plan. Am I missing it?
If you turn over the page on page 276, the design of the New Bond Street intersection is shown there.
Oh, yes, I see that there, but why is it not on the master plan? Why is the street not on the master plan at all?
The master plan is as was adopted by council. So this is the master plan that council adopted. I don't know if that answers your question, but...
Councillor Scanlon, I think you'll find on page 275, it's called Residential Street Number 2.
Oh,
sorry, I didn't...
No, that's Grandstand Way, yes, that's Grandstand Way, but New Bond Street isn't on the plan.
That's the intersection there, isn't it, Jim?
On page, if you're looking at page 275, and if you follow what's marked Residential Street 2, which is being called Grandstand Way, and then if you look sort of looking towards Morrison Road, if you look to the west or further down the page to the left of that, there's the New Bond Street is shown there. There's the properties and then the road next to it.
It's just not clear that that's a road, and so I don't believe we really considered all of this. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson, you got a question? Well, get to this item? No, we'll go to the other one. Councillor Johnson, you got one question on this one?
Yeah, I got a couple of questions, Mr Mayor. Thank you very much. Through you, Mr Mayor, to Mr Cohen. The question I've got is, why was this this intersection configuration not noticed at the time when the Midland Oval Redevelopment Master Plan was under development? How was it omitted?
Well, the master plan is it is just that. It's a master plan with all the detailed design follows on from that.
What you're saying is we could then change the master plan as part of the detailed design, so we could move move Residential Street 2 or Grandstand Way.
Or staff couldn't do that. That's obvious. We have to build the roads to design and build the roads as per the master plan adopted by council.
That's another question. I guess this is more of a structure plan. As nobody wants all these roads anyway, could we just not build the road, and then we could leave New Bond Street open? So just abandon the plan to build Grandstand Way and just have more public open space. That would solve the problem.
I think the comment there
and
is
keep the money.
Master plan adopted by council and the structure plan approved by the Department of Planning.
Yeah, but I'm asking, is it a valid thing to make the change? We don't need to.
I don't think Mr Coton's qualified. He's given us a technical report around an intersection and the construction of an intersection. That's what we're dealing with, council. And you're asking Mr Coton to make a judgment on a master plan, which is not his area of expertise.
I understand. So maybe the question is for Mr Van der Linde.
Well, I suggest you get back to the item at hand, which is the construction of an intersection.
Well, that's the problem, Mr Mayor. The master plan is incorrect, so therefore I'd like to ask Mr Van der Linde what he thinks about it.
Well, I don't think you're correct, answer. It's not correct, councillor. Mr Coton told you that this is an overarching direction for council, and now we're in a detailed design. But if you want Mr Van der Linde to answer it,
yes, please.
I'm sure he'll give you something similar.
I'd like it from, as you'll say, Mr Mayor, that it's not fair to ask Mr Coton this question. I'd like to ask Mr Van der Linde the question.
Leon?
Mr Mayor, if I may just make 100% sure I understand your question. Your question is, why can't we remove the road that's shown on the master plan as Residential Street 2?
Yes.
And that solves the problem. Well, the master plan was designed. There was a process that it went through. It went through a process, and it was approved. So that is what is in front of us that we need to consider when we now talk about the intersection itself. If the council so feels that the master plan should be reviewed to remove the plan. It is a total new investigation that will have to be made, a new process, and everything will have to be redone.
Thank you very much, Vandelin. Mr. Vandelin, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, and then we need to move on.
Thank you, Leon. Because a lot of things have changed from the original Midland Activity Centre structure plan that's informed this Midland Oval site, including the closure of Helena Street, and that the train station is no longer going to be sited at Cale Street. So that effectively, doesn't it, that underpins that Midland Activity Centre structure plan. So isn't it, given that such big changes have taken place, that the things are not going to happen. The train station is not going to be relocated to Cale Street. That's not going to be a main pedestrian thoroughfare. Helena Street's going to close.
So you've got a question, Councillor?
Yes, my question is, isn't this now a very good time to actually have a look at this precinct and ask ourselves, is this really time to reassess it? Because things have changed so much from the original master plan. I'm asking Mr. Van der Linden that question.
They're working with an adopted plan from council.
Oh, well, I'm asking Mr. Van der Linden that question. Yeah.
Leon, you can answer if you want, but I think it's an inappropriate question to ask Mr. Van der Linden's opinion on something that's an adopted plan from council. I'm
asking him, shouldn't it be time to
I'm
actually...
not arguing with the council, I'm making a point. So,
I'm asking a question of him.
Mr. Mayor, it is an approved plan that was approved by council, and if there's no reason to review it unless council wants us to review it.
There you go. Thank you, Len. Thank you, councillors. Now move on to 7.3, which is the appointment of authorised complaints officers, and Ms. Albright.
Good evening, councillors. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to draw to your attention that I've tabled a late report in the supplementary agenda this evening. On Tuesday, the 2nd of February, a number of new regulations came in and were gazetted to take effect on the 3rd of February. These included a new mandatory code of conduct, new standards relating to the recruitment, performance review and termination of CEOs, and regulations relating to the employee code of conduct. These changes, some of them require an immediate change and some of them require some other, more short-term actions to be taken. So within the next 3 weeks, the council is required to authorise a person to receive complaints under the Code of Conduct. The council needs to approve a form for complaints to be lodged. And we also need to publish some things on our website. Within the next 3 months, we need to revise our code of conduct for councillors. We need to put in place a policy to incorporate new guidelines for the recruitment, performance review and termination of CEO. And we also need to update our employee code of conduct to make sure that it aligns with the councillor code of conduct. So tonight, the report that's been put forward to you is to authorise the Chief Executive Officer as the complaints officer for code of conduct complaints. We've also put up a form to you for complaints to be lodged in, and we've also proposed that a delegation be put in place to the Chief Executive Officer to allow him to appoint complaints officers. And there's a copy of the model code of conduct, which is what will go on our website for the next 3 months until we've had a chance to actually review that code of conduct with you. So it's our intention in March to hold briefings with the council to go through the council code of conduct and make any changes or additions to that model code of conduct that's been gazetted, and also to go through the CEO recruitment, performance review and termination policy, which we'll need to establish.
Questions, Ms. Albright? Councillor Coley?
Just to confirm, I'm concerned that the CEO would be probably best applying his time elsewhere other than dealing with some of the silly things that go on in council. I understand that this delegation allows the CEO to appoint officers to deal with these matters, and he doesn't have to necessarily deal with them himself.
Yes,
Is that correct?
That's correct. The delegation would allow the Chief Executive Officer to do that.
That's a good outcome. Thank you.
Because he already is a complaints officer. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Ms. Albrecht. So, what has changed then? Because all we're doing is delegating the complaints officer role down. Is there any significant change here?
So the CEO is already the complaints officer under the Local Government Act for the purpose of dealing with complaints to the Local Government Standards Panel. But these are new regulations that also establish a complaints officer for code of conduct complaints. And so the advice from the department is that we need to, reaffirm that the Chief Executive Officer is going to be our complaints officer for the purposes of the code of conduct complaints as well as Local Government Standard Panel complaints.
I think I understand.
If there's no further... Councillor McNamara.
Ms. Albrecht, what's the difference between this code of conduct and the previous code of conduct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the model code of conduct that has been gazetted is, I guess, more specific around some of the behaviour that is acceptable or conduct of councillors that is acceptable. It also puts in place a process that the council has to follow in order to deal with that complaint. So that's actually regulated now. It won't be up to individual councils to determine how they're going to deal with code of conduct complaints.
Why? It's the 3rd of May from the point of view of that this has to be approved by the city or by the council. The 3rd of May. Are we going to have a full briefing session on this code of conduct, where it differs from the other, and how it affects us as individuals?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, that's correct. Councillor, we will be providing a briefing to Council where we will take you through the model code of conduct, explain how it is different to the existing code of conduct, and there will also be an opportunity for the Council to put in place some of its own values and behaviours and things that you would like to see in the code as well.
With regard to the CEO being the referee or whatever within the complaints officer. I'll turn this on. With regard to the CEO being the complaints officer, that hasn't changed. That was the way. That used to be that was the rule, and that was the way we looked at it before. The CEO could delegate that situation to another person. So why do we have to deal with this tonight? Or next week, sorry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. It's because of the new regulations that have just been gazetted. The department is asking local governments to reconfirm who will be their complaints officer to deal with code of conduct complaints. So yes, you're correct that under our existing code of conduct, the Chief Executive Officer would have been the person that dealt with complaints, but because these regulations are new, you actually need to formally appoint the Chief Executive Officer to deal with the complaints under these new regulations, and you need to do that within 3 weeks of them being gazetted, which is the 24th of February.
I'm sorry, but that has led to one more question. My apologies, Mr. Mayor. I thought that was going to be my last one. But now you're telling me that we're approving something because of these new code of conduct.
I think the word was reaffirm.
Yeah,
the
reaffirm
CEO.
Because of these new but we don't even know what's in the code of conduct yet, and we have to reaffirm. What are we reaffirming? Is it the CEO's authority we're reaffirming tonight or next week?
So,
through you, Mr. Mayor. So what you're doing at this point in time is that you're reaffirming or confirming that the Chief Executive Officer will be the complaints officer for the purpose of the code of conduct. The way that the department has implemented these new requirements is they have gazetted them in regulations. They've said this is the model code of conduct. It applies now. You've got 3 months to adopt your own code of conduct, which must be based on this model code of conduct. But until that time that we we take our 3 months to review our code of conduct and put that in place. The model code of conduct applies, and these new regulations apply, which require the Chief Executive Officer to be confirmed as the complaints officer.
That's very strange. Again, Mr Mayor, I'm sorry, but it has led to another question.
Okay, well, I just want to point out, Councillor, in the report that the Department of Local Government has said that we have to authorise one person as a complaints officer before the 24th of October 2021.
I don't have any issue with that, Mr Mayor. 2021, October 2021 is another 6 months away or 7 months
24th of February.
That's better. That's
what I said, 24th of February, so 2 weeks.
We want to do
so we have to do it this council meeting.
Actually, instead of October. Anyway, besides that, you're actually saying that we're approving next week on the 17th, we're asked to approve this code of conduct before we get a briefing.
No. We're just appointing the complaints officer.
No.
No.
Ms Albright is after telling me just 2 minutes ago that we approved this particular code of conduct next week. Is that correct?
I'll just let the CEO clarify.
Mr Mayor, if I can through the chair, it's only to reaffirm the complaints officer. The code of conduct is a model and that's attached for councillors to look at, but as Ms Albright indicated, we'll be workshopping that within March, and then within 3 months you need to confirm the details of that code of conduct, and you'll be able to put your values and other behaviours and things into that.
But through you, Mr Mayor, to the CEO, is this situation confirming that we now agree that this is the new code of conduct?
No. The item is
Mr Mayor,
appointment
no,
of authorised
that's
complaints
not.
officers. That's the item.
All right, I would say no more. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Parry.
Just a very quick one, Mr Mayor, if that's okay. It says here that it also impacts candidates running for election as a councillor. How can you implement punishment or sanctions to candidates in the laws if they're not a member or staff member or the council themselves?
Through you, Mr Mayor, that will only apply once elected. So if a candidate breaches the code of conduct during their campaign and then they are elected to council, a complaint or a breach can be lodged against them at that stage. So they need, as a candidate, they will need to be aware of the code of conduct in case they are elected.
There you go. No other questions? Thank you, councillors. Thanks to Ms Albrecht. Right, so of those items we discussed so far, councillors, I have an alternate recommendation on 4.5 from Councillor Zanino and 4.6 from Councillor Kiley. Councillor Podovnik on 5.2. So, if any of those items we discussed so far, councillors, are there any others? Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. I would look at 2.1. I'll have discussions with staff about cleaning up some of that.
Just a moment, Councillor. I'm dealing with those items that we've discussed and we've had on, so then I'll roll into the full sheet.
If you wish, yeah.
Nothing out of those? Okay. So, councillors, are there any further questions of any other items on the agenda? Councillor, someone had a question on Brabham, 4.3.
That was me.
That was you. Okay.
Thank you. Really what I wanted to get to was the question of the scale. I mean, it's a report. Yes, I get it. But where does the scale of this end? Do we have some indication from WA Planning about more upscaling, more and more and more upscaling? Because, as I said in my email to everyone, the original plan was 3,000 residents. Well, my calculations are close to 20,000. I was a little bit out in what I said in my last email. So I want to know, does the WAPC have bigger picture plans for much higher densities?
Mr Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I note this is a local development plan around building variations to small lots already created. So, but taking Councillor Henderson's question, look, it's been the planning philosophy of successive governments in this state that hasn't really departed much from one party or the other to have higher density. And that's the state planning strategy for the Perth metropolitan area looks like, and they've always split these things to talk about variations between maybe 60% density outside of or in greenfield areas and 40% infill. But the notion of increasing density has been a aspect or foundation stone of the planning philosophies of successive state governments for a long time, to increase density, and particularly, as you've all heard of that phrase, transit-orientated development. If you've been on, many of you would have been, Mr Mayor, on planning seminars or conferences, and you would have heard that phrase, transit-orientated development, and this council had Professor Newman here. He's a doyen of transit-orientated development, of course, as you would know. So particularly where we've got locations with the new metro net, you will see, Mr Mayor, a concerted effort to leverage off that infrastructure to facilitate higher density in the appropriate locations around train stations. I don't have. If Councillor Henderson is after, is there an end point where you won't have any more increased density in some of these areas? I can't answer that. But the general philosophy is it's encouraged, and the Commission have a process of being quite flexible to allow subdividers such as the proponents here and others to actually look at modifying density codings at the subdivision stage. So they might go, well, instead of having, for example, a subdivision with 100 lots, let's modify it and see if we can get 120 or 130. So it is prevalent. I understand the position, but I don't think I can say there is an end limit or a benchmark as to what the state government, the planning agencies are looking at accepting, other than with this corridor, with MetroNet, you can expect to see more of it, Mr Mayor, I think.
So the continuing question on from that then is that, Mr Mayor, given that we were sold a pup in the 1990s, and we're seeing almost no vegetation with these higher and higher densities, I would have expected to somewhere in the report to see something about improvements in the local amenity for the area. Why wasn't that included? Is there some reasoning?
Mr Ross.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This local development plan is a micro-level subset of a macro picture, the macro picture being the structure plan. So when we're looking at, and the structure plans when we're looking at, as councillors well know, a structure plan will look at the urban area and they'll say nominal densities R20, R60. They'll indicate your main thoroughfares or roads through there and the road types. They'll indicate your green blobs for your public open space. So one of the basic things, as we know, we're always looking at is, have they got the 10% public open space? Have they got the public open space in the right configurations, in the right locations, shapes, etc., for maximum utility? So that question around the green stuff, so to speak, that's already been addressed at the higher order instrument, the structure plan. This macro level local development plan is only looking at the building forms for certain lots that are actually of a certain size. So that question's already been answered with the actual structure plan relevant to this area that's we've already dealt with.
So just while you're on that subject, Councillor Henderson, the former CEO and myself made a very strongly worded presentation to Minister Tinley, who, as you understand, the Department of Communities falls under, and also the WA Planning Commission around densities. One of the key points we raised there was the current formula of 10% open space to a development is, in our opinion, redundant because it doesn't take increased densities. Because what we're having is, in effect, on a per head population basis, a reduced density. Very clear on that, both this and the other Dayton structure plan.
And Mr Mayor, if I could add to that, I think it's important to remember the 10% operational maximum that the state has been operating under for public open space was proposed in 1955 by Professor Gordon Stevenson. And he based that on a density of 30 dwelling units a hectare. So if you start to increase that, say you had 60 dwelling units a hectare, then the natural provision of 10% public open space for half the density may well be redundant.
Just to comment, Mayor, thank you for your presentations in that regard. I think it's a matter of considerable concern to the local community.
Councillor Kelano.
Can I just confirm, you said that you that there was reduced density, or did you mean reduced public open space?
No. So as the
as the density increases.
Don't interrupt me, please, Councillor.
Yeah.
I'll explain to you. So the current formula of 10% open space,
Yeah.
right, of any development,
Yeah.
is becoming redundant because the densities are increasing.
Yes.
So in effect, what you have is more dwellings.
Yes.
When you amortise that to public open space, is in fact becoming less and less open space per dwelling.
Yes, that's exactly what I just asked
That's what
you.
I'm saying, yeah.
But anyway, thank you for confirming that. But anyway, the question I wanted to ask was that, first of all, I wanted to ask, why is the section under consideration just a pocket in sort of an empty space? I couldn't quite understand why it was we were just considering this. Pardon?
There's that green area there.
Yeah, what? Oh, I thought it was actually the red, the block of units. It's not the block of units in it, because aren't we talking about?
Page 120, is that the one we're talking about?
120, Mr Mayor, if you look at that, you'll see
Yeah.
the little inset picture shows the location of the block of lots relative to the broader area of the structure plan. And this is only related to those lots, this plan.
Oh, okay. So where are we on page 119 then? How does that relate to 119?
119 is just the land parcel, the parent land parcel.
Oh, so
this
that
is
little green
proposed
thing.
over.
Okay, that's all right. Okay. So it's still a good question. Why is that little green? Oh, I see. You've got all this other subdivision around it. That's fine. Okay. So is the officer's recommendation basically rejecting the fact that these dwellings should be built without a carport? Because isn't the whole issue here in this one about the fact that there's just not enough space on these lots for for someone to have a garage? And so, okay, so what we'll do is we'll just use the street parking, and then people can use the street parking. But then the next question is, well, what about people who want to use the street parking who come to visit? And I mean, it's a good question, isn't it? Because places like Dayton have got even more street parking.
Yeah, Councillor, that was also an issue we raised with Mr Tinley and the WA Planning Commission. The exactly same thing with densities,
exactly.
no
So
parking.
I wanted to just confirm that what we're talking about in the options that we're supposed to be, considering, is that the option one is basically saying we'd only endorse it if there isn't this plan to have these places without carports or garages, and that we use the street parking for residences. Is that correct?
Through Mr Mayor, what the report is saying, and what the proponent was originally proposing, is it said it wanted to have the capacity to build 3-bedroom units with 1 carport, rather than the standard 2 that applies. So originally, we made it very clear to the proponents that we'll present this up to council. We can't support it because you've got nowhere for a second car a second car in a household to park, and you've also got nowhere for visitors. So what the proponent then went away and did and said, okay, proximate to this area there's various embayment parkings. And we had to factor in how much embayment parking is required for visitors to public open space, how much is required for general visitors for the other lots that already have the 2 bays but no space to park behind in the front setback, and then the numbers of bays required for visitors and residents for these units to accommodate an extra couple of car bays. And it was an exercise in arithmetic, Mr Mayor. It was a very basic working out the total parking demand for the available embayment parking in the vicinity, and we said to the proponent, you're short. So the proponent said, well, we'll propose to put another 4 bays in. We'll put another 4 bays embayment parking in the location indicated on the plan. And it's true to say, though, that there is nothing, you can't put a sign out there and say this is for Unit 4 across the way private parking. It's public parking. So first in, best dressed. But at least in theory, there is enough available bays to meet all the projected estimated parking demand, including the demand for a second car space for these units that only have 1 for the household. plus the visitors. So it's not ideal because there's no guarantee you don't own that car parking space. So it would be equally valid, Mr Mayor, if the council said, well, that's great, but what if Joe Blow down the road uses it or whatever and it's not available? People then are going to be looking for somewhere to park, and that's a valid point. So you could go either way on all of this, but that was certainly the original proposal. We said to Prime Minister, we can't support you constructing a 3-bedroom dwelling where you're already short one car bay under the existing planning framework. That's pushing it a bit too far. But they've come back and indicated we'll provide parking, close parking across the road off-site, and hopefully that will meet those people that might choose to have a 2-car household in these units.
Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. First things first, councillors, can you please look at 411, and I beg all you councillors to have a good hard look at this report as well. It's pretty, I wouldn't say damning. So page 234, item 4.11, Brabham resident density investigations. I think it's quite a valid report. I just got a quick question in regards to one of the comments made by the Department of Education, so you can pass this on to the staff, Mr Mayor. The DOE's recent analysis of existing and projected numbers of dwellings and resultant student yield revealed that the planned primary public primary schools within Brabham have a student catchment areas in excess of the dwelling yield threshold of 1,500 dwellings as per WAPC Development Control Point 24. The cumulative effect of the increasing dwelling yield from each individual local structure plan and subsequent subdivisions has resulted in the planned Brabham Primary School opening 21 to be deemed inadequate to support the increased school yield. Does staff know when the next school will be built in Brabham, please?
I think that might be for Mr Van Lien.
Mr Mayor, through you, when the construction of the new school will start, I'm not 100% clear. I'm aware that the department is looking at acquiring an additional site in the vicinity of that area, and we're meeting with them in the next week to have further discussions, and we'll find out and get that information back to you.
Follow-on question, Mr Mayor, if that's okay?
Yep.
Would that, because of the inadequacy, as noted in the comment from the Education Department, would that have an impact in regards to the Henley Brook development as well, Mr Mayor?
Mr Van Lien.
Mr Mayor, it's actually not an inaccuracy. The policy was based on one primary school per 1,500 lots. They've reviewed the policy recently and now recommend that 1,800 is the break-even point for a school. So you will need more schools under the new policy in future. So it's a combination of that and the fact that the densities ended up being higher that required an additional school in the area.
And a final point, if I may, Mr Mayor, to other councillors. If you look at the report in regards to page 236, the average household size is 2.75 according to the city's average. It's actually 3.3 in regards to Brabham, which means an additional 4,620 to 5,510 people. Thank you.
Councillor Perry, we're dealing with whether we're going to agree to these 8 dwellings or not. So we're not getting into the bigger picture plan here.
I was actually raising 4.11, Mr Mayor.
Well,
thank you.
Councillor, well, we're still talking about it. Councillor Johnson, you have a question?
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, just one brief question. Earlier on, you said that as the residential density increases with these new planning schemes, therefore it seems reasonable that the amount of public open space should correspondingly increase from 10%, and you've put that view to Minister Tinley. Can I just ask, does that apply in Midland as well as Brabham?
We're talking specifically about the densities in Dayton, Councillor. So, Councillor Richards, you got a question? Oh, so you got a question or not? No? Councillor Kyle, you got a question?
Yes, Mayor, through you. We, as councillors, have to look at this plans, particularly on page 120, and interpret how this is going to appear. There's no setback noted in the plans from the front of the front border to the actual house. I don't know what that would be, Mr. Russell. Do you know whether there's actually, because that was something we raised with the applicant on more than one occasion, how much space in the front of the property would you have space for a tree, for example? Do you know if there's a setback requirement?
Through Mr. Mayor, there is. What this report has only looked at, the report is not looking at changing the existing framework for the front setback under the density cutting for these lots. Something in the order of, I think it's 4 or slightly less. Certainly, there is not enough room to park another car behind it, but there is enough room for these things, these type of lot product, and there are other examples. There is enough room for some planting, yes. Obviously, to the side of the driveway out of the carport, but there is enough room in the front setback area for that.
So if you look at Fuselage Road, I mean, most of it's taken up with those parking bays, the 8 parking bays. Is there adequate space in the footpath areas to plant trees? I just don't see that this is going to be a green space whatsoever. I mean, we're trying to interpret what this is going to look like in the end. For me, I can't see that there's going to be enough space to plant trees to mitigate the heat of this suburb. Can I get an opinion? I mean, am I imagining this, or do you think it's enough room to plant trees, to put garden beds, to make it to beautify the area?
Through Mr. Mayor, if the question is, I mean, the obvious point here will be you've got a linear piece of public open space in that location, which I might add, from my recollection, I don't think the council or the staff supported originally under the structure plan. But it is there and it's been approved. I'd have to check to see whether we have an embellishment plan for that piece of public open space, because it may well entail some form of planting at the edges. I don't know. I can look into that. But certainly it's quite true, and this is the point that I know this council and staff have been discussing for many, many years. And Mr. Tan, of course, as you'll recall, was a great exponent of it in this role previously. And that was with the shrinking down of the road reserves under livable neighbourhoods to have more compact road reserve, which ostensibly was originally designed because developers thought, well, we get more yield, we get more housing, more bang for the buck, and we're giving up less land, so it's less wastage for cars. But the flip side of it is, of course, you reduce your capacity with narrow streets to actually have public infrastructure in terms of footpaths and street trees and the rest of it. So, look, I mean, and everyone's been to the suburbs that we know. We've got examples where they are literally just wall-to-wall roofs with very little in the way of certainly private gardens. But what these codes are doing here, though, critically, is they're saying, we'll let you build closer to the boundaries and have parapet walls. We'll let you build forward and have a reduced setback. But the trade-off is we're getting them to require that they have greater internal courtyard open space. It doesn't have to be a courtyard, but a greater area of open space within the lots, which will then give it the prospect of landowners actually utilising that for some better form of planting. So where we had small lots basically equated to no gardens, no greenery, and all the benefits that entails, these codes are pushing back to get a trade-off to say increase the public open, well, not the public, the private open space internally within sites, outdoor living areas, to try and give better prospect for owners and residents to plant that out and create a green space. So that's where the dynamics around these code trade-offs, Mr. Mayor.
I think it's pretty clear what they want to build. Councillor, we only got to go out there, you can see it now. We know it's... Yeah. Yep, that's I agree. Right, councillors, I'm mindful of the time that we are getting late, so I'd like to push on. So, unless anyone's got a pressing question...
Can I ask a question about the waste plan? I just want to ask a few questions about that.
Yep, certainly. That'll be Mr. Coaten, I would think.
Can I do it now?
Yeah, he's ready,
okay,
waiting.
Great. Mr. Coaten, does this... I had a look through it, and I couldn't see anywhere where... and I don't know if this is part of this plan, because I'm not sure what the purpose of it is, other than there's this review every couple of years or so, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a legislative requirement for us to submit a waste plan.
Yeah, exactly. So do we have to put in there the cost difference between the previous bulk pickup system and the bulk pickup system that we have now? Because there's a lot of people in the community like to know why we've got the current bulk pickup system, and so it'd be really, really good to be able to have that comparison of how much rubbish is picked up, the cost of collection and the cost of disposal with the old system as compared to the new system. That's just something I thought was missing from the report.
Yeah. There is a report to council coming on that matter.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, that's the. Yeah, but that's a different matter to the...
Oh, that's a different one.
This is a legislative requirement to get this in by the end of
Oh,
March.
right, okay. All right. Well, and the other thing that struck me was illegal dumping costs. I'd like to know, I mean, you sort of refer to them in here, but what I'd like to know is, have illegal dumping costs gone up since the new system's been in place? And I think it's been in place, about 4 years now, has it?
Yeah, illegal dumping is generally going down and for a combination of reasons.
Okay. Oh, well, it'd be good to have those figures. But have we had this new system for about 4 years or more?
I think it'll be 3 years.
Oh,
Yeah,
3
it's coming
years.
up,
Okay.
Yeah. But,
all right.
But yeah, I can
anyway,
provide you some information on those.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to see in a next report or in another report that you bring to council about waste. Thank you.
Okay, any pressing questions? Councillor Richardson, your hand was up first.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor, to Mr Bishop. Sorry to hold everyone up tonight. Just a quick question in regard to the break-ins in Ellenwood in the last 48 hours.
I'm sorry, Councillor. That's a whole separate question. We're talking about, this is an agenda forum. No, we don't have general business, so you can ask him that separately. We do know about it. Councillor McNamara.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a question for the Midland Ward councillors. Are you aware of item 3.1 in the supplementary budget? It's a supplementary agenda from the point of view. And are you aware that there's $6,642 been parachuted in from the point of view of the Festival of Perth that's been held in Guildford, and that you're going to get a bonus from the point of view of free rent?
I think we all were, Councillor, because I did circulate some stuff about this some weeks
Ask
ago.
the question, Mr.
Councillor
Mayor.
Peters.
It's on the agenda.
And
thank you.
Councillors, we know it. But last question, Councillors, I'm going to run through the items to be withdrawn.
Oh, that's what I was going to do, Mr. Mayor. I just want to ask a question about C1.4 of Mr. Van der Linde, if that's all right.
Mr. Van Linde?
Mr. Van der Linde, as you know, C1.4, the motion places suggested $200,000 is an appropriate amount for a report to achieve net zero CO2 emissions. Can you advise what amount you think would be appropriate to write such a report?
Mr. Mayor, through you. We've got experienced staff that can do most of the work. So provided that we move resources around and make use of those people, we should be able to do that work in the financial year that the motion proposes. On that basis, and on the basis that we will then be able to move some of the other work that was planned for that year, we should be able to do that work with an additional 60,000 on that budget for that year.
Okay, thank you.
So what that means is, Mr. Van der Linde, if you can confirm, instead of $200,000, it's $60,000 in the report. That's all I need to.
That's correct.
Great, thank you.
Right. Okay, councillors, I'm going to run through those items. Currently, you recall earlier that I'd have 4.5, 4.6 withdrawn and 5.2. So any councillor wishing to withdraw the following items: 4.1. Can you? Yeah. Can I get to it? I'm going through the list, councillor. 4.2. 4.3. Well, because I'm working through the list I've got here right in front of me, councillor. So. This is not my list.
That's the legal representation 1, 2.1.
Okay. Well, let me run through these and I'll come back to those that aren't on here. 4.3. That's the one we just talked about in Brabham. Or, well, I think you should discuss with Mr. Russell. 4.7, 4.8, 4.9, 4.10, 4.11.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'll withdraw
On
that.
4.11. 5.1, 6.1, 6.2, 6.3. 6.5, Councillor Coley's always done something there. 7.1, 7.2, and then we get down to Part C. Councillor Henderson, you want to do something with 2.1? Your intention is? Okay, we'll come back to us. Any other items to be withdrawn, councillors?
Yes, sorry, Mr. Mayor. I missed the opportunity earlier to withdraw 4.4.
Right. Any more, councillors? Okay. On that note, councillors, declare the meeting closed. Thank you.